And we have John L. Bell of Espousal Strategies and Joseph Wall. And they've been working with me to put this together and get it ready, and they will do a presentation on it.
Great, and I'm wondering where the slide movers.
It
Since
should-
this
there-
is a hybrid meeting.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you have to call out
say
next
advance
slide.
Okay,
slide.
great. Well, thank you for that. Chair Harrington, members of the board, good afternoon. Thanks again for the opportunity to come before you. We have some great news. I'm also joined by Joel Wall with Wall and Associates. We're prepared this afternoon to kind of walk through, as the interim administrator indicated, walk through the initial draft job description for the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer. Next slide, please. First, I would like to just introduce Joel for a second. Espousal Strategies has teamed up with Joe Wall and Associates to work with the board and the county to lead your recruitment effort of the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer. And maybe I just ask Joe to maybe introduce a little bit about who he is.
Thank you very much, and pleasure to be here. I had mentioned to Chair Harrington that living and having my office in Washington County, I'm very excited by the opportunity to work with you on this exciting new position. I left the city of Portland, where I was the deputy director of the first Office of Equity and Human Rights, and I helped Mayor Adams at that time and Commissioner Fritz to get that office off the ground, recruited its first director, Dante James, and then in 2017 left after having successfully done a national search for the new police chief, who unfortunately has moved on to bigger and brighter things in Philadelphia as the new police commissioner. But we launched our firm, Wall and Associates, to particularly work with organizations who are interested and very serious about bringing in diverse leadership within their organizations. And since that time, we've had an opportunity to work with some of the leading nonprofits, foundations, and local government in the area to recruit some of the top leaders. Most recently, we worked with United Way of Columbia Willamette, and we were successful in recruiting their new CEO, Cindy Adams, who came from Hawaii. And so we're very fortunate and very grateful for all of the support that we've gotten from communities of color and others here in this area. And again, very excited to be working with you all on this exciting new position.
Great, thank you, Joe. So this slide just kind of gives a quick snapshot of sort of how we got to this juncture. As we all know, we worked in tandem with all of you, as well as internal staff, as well as external stakeholders, to really provide input into the equity resolution that you approved on February 26th. Cannot believe it's been that long already.
Bullet point, your very first one, in a few words, it's very short. It doesn't really, there's a lot that went into that initial work and input. Talk about sort of understated.
And indeed, Commissioner Scouten. We have the pleasure of working with you to begin the development of the position description, and Joel and the county administrator has been terrific in helping to guide that process internally. Joel has been retained to kind of help us lead that work. And then we had a chance to review draft position description with community stakeholders, similar to how we drafted the work with you of the resolution. We took to the community, a group of community stakeholders, draft description, and they offered pretty significant and positive feedback into that process to the result that you see today. I did just want to highlight a couple of areas where the community had particular interests and wanted to really hone in. One of which is they felt it very important that we mention in the job description that the eventual sort of candidate comes to this work with understanding of racial equity. Yes, we certainly want to advance equity writ large, but that it was very important that racial equity was integrated in the job description to send a clear message. And so we did integrate that as well as a number of other elements to this draft description. Next slide, please. As I indicated, we reviewed input from internal and external stakeholders, benchmarked against similar positions in other local municipalities, as well as municipalities in other jurisdictions. And the key considerations were internal equity, countywide executive level scope and impact of the position, ability to build and create a new office. Obviously, what we're attempting to do here at Washington County is to create something from scratch. So really wanted to make sure that that was interwoven into the job description, someone coming to this role having had that experience. And ability to create and lead implementation of county strategic equity plan. You called that out in your adopted board resolution, creating a DEI strategic plan, really wanting to have a thought partner in this position to kind of work with the board and help lead that effort internally. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jill.
Thank you very much. And you know, I just want to take a moment, and Commissioner Scouten, I think you called out correctly too, that I know that you did a lot of internal work, you know, in regard to getting us to this point, and I want to applaud you because, as you know, there are a lot of jurisdictions across the country who are really engaged in this work right now, and as you all found too, engagement with the community, and particularly with our disadvantaged communities, is so critical, you know, in the development of this work, and to get to this point and to follow through with it is really a tribute to your leadership. And so I really want to applaud the county and your leadership and work on all of this. With that, we'll get to the next slide. We'll begin looking at kind of the goals of our process. We want to ensure an inclusive process, obviously that results in a diverse and very high quality applicant pool. And I think that with the work that we all have been doing thus far, and certainly with the county administrators' assistance too, and helping to get the job description to the point where it's at right now, we feel very strongly that we have a very compelling position and one that will be very attractive to a national pool, and I think that's really important. As John L. mentioned, we wanted to make sure that we were engaging communities that have been involved in this work and helping to create not only this position, but also the proclamation that you all had approved and you know, looking at this work as we move forward. And the last thing, and Steve has been very good at reminding us that we wanted to make sure that we were developing a schedule that would allow the new county administrator to be participating in those final interviews. And so we kind of worked backwards from that anticipated start date, you know, and worked our way back, you know, into developing this process that you see outlined in the next slide. And again, part of that was kind of engagement with community. And as John L. mentioned, not only did we get input in regard to the position, but also some recommendations in regard to some of the outreach strategies that we wanted to make sure that we were engaging. Because as we all know, we don't know who someone else knows, and they could be an ideal candidate for this position. And so we wanted to make sure that we were getting that invitation out, you know, to as many folks as we could to do that. And as we get through that, one of the things when we're doing either a regional or a national recruitment like this, I think having it open for a month at least is a minimum that we want to make sure that we're looking at, because that allows enough time for us to do the direct kind of recruitment and outreach strategy that we want to implement. And then it also gives those individuals who are not actively looking right now, but then hear about this position, it gives them enough time to develop their materials and to be able to submit those. So that kind of helped, and then you kind of see the outline of the process after it closes. Then we go through minimum qualification screening, phone screens, and first round interviews. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this because given our current reality, I think there's a lot of questions in regard to, is this a good time to open a recruitment? And there is no right answer, as I think many of you, and I'm sure you're aware of, and all of the things that you've had to be engaged in most recently. There's no playbook for what we've been engaged in, because, you know, few of us have really had the experience of having gone through anything like this. So when you ask me that, the only way we'll find out is when we open and engage. I've done some smaller recruitments, and I have to tell you, it's been very interesting that we've continued to get good interest in our positions here locally. And so I think that tells you something. Yeah, I agree with you, Chair Harrington. Yes.
For the audio, my fingers are crossed.
But most likely, those first-round interviews, we're going to anticipate that those will be done virtually, considering kind of our timeline and with the opening of the state. But our finalist interviews, we would anticipate 2 to 3 finalists coming in, and at this point in time, we've developed some scenarios where they would meet with about 4 different panels that would involve members of staff, leadership, which would be probably other department leaders, some participation from the board, and then external community stakeholders as well. So, and then the final round would be the reference and background checks and things like that before we have anticipated final interviews and things like that to go through and a start date. So, any questions on any of that? Great. Yes.
Thank you. I have a question, or it might be more of a comment here. In this proposed timeline and in the process that you've identified, I've had the opportunity to talk to several organizations that have been through this process. And one piece of advice that I heard that, you know, I hadn't really thought of before, it was to interject in the recruitment process someone who represents the community writ large here as a DEI leader, as somebody who is recognized as a trustworthy source about what in the purpose in that individual in the recruitment process is to verify in a lot of cases what the county's intention is, to talk about what the process is, and to be somebody that would be a trusted source in relationships. So I just would like to consider that possibility as we look at the recruitment process.
And Commissioner, and I'm not sure, but I think that's why I was hired to be
Great.
that my background, and then I haven't maybe talked about as fully, but for 30 years I've been engaged in diversity, equity, and inclusion work here in this area. And one of the things that kind of sets my firm apart from other search firms is the fact that I have very trusted relationships, particularly with communities of color and other disadvantaged communities, because over the years have had developed, you know, that trusting relationship. I was also one of the co-founders of an organization called Partners in Diversity, which hosts a quarterly reception for new professionals of color. And I think that you all are members.
Nakashima and I were in the same American leadership class. So,
My co-conspirator, so you know well. So,
but maybe what I'm saying is that somebody who isn't
Sure.
invested
sure.
in the outcome.
That's
And,
right.
You know, you are, well, with all due respect to your experience and your position in that community, I'm thinking about somebody who isn't necessarily invested in the outcome.
That's right. Commissioner Teresa, if I might, what I'm hearing you say is ensuring that we have a strong sort of representation from the community, someone who is seen as a leader in the DEI space, who could be a good barometer as we move along this process. Is that an accurate?
Yeah, yes.
We agree with you, and that's one of the reasons why, as we look at sort of the development of the interview process, you'll see opportunities for that to occur.
Thank you.
And we agree with that perspective.
Thank you for that. Good. Any other questions? I think that's all that we had on the process pieces, on the recruitment plan. we would anticipate a very robust outreach and engagement process. Minimum qualifications. Yes.
Could you speak a little bit more about how external contacts were involved in setting up or contributing input for the job description for this position?
John Allen.
Absolutely, pardon me. Chair Harrington, from the onset of the resolution development process, we've worked with a core group of community-based leaders representing, Adelante Mojares, Central Cottrell, Coalition of Communities of Color, a number of other organizations. So we went back to that group and asked them to weigh in on this initial job description.
Commissioners, do you have any questions about the job description in any way?
Is that this
Yep.
document you're talking about?
Yes.
Who is, and I apologize if you've already said this, who's on the interview team?
That hasn't been fully developed as we've been talking about in the planning right now, Commissioner, is that the finalist interviews would be a panel, a number of panels. And so there would be a staff panel, a leadership panel, a panel made up of this body, and then a community stakeholder panel. And again, John L. had mentioned, who potential constituents of that panel might be.
Okay. I was looking at the MQ, as Commissioner Scouten pointed out. I had no idea what MQ was either, so thank you for that. I'm not sure I agree with the analogy that 4 years of experience is equivalent to a bachelor's degree. So when we drop down to the third criteria of high school diploma and 11 years, as compared to an associate's degree in 9 years or a bachelor's degree in 7 years, my inclination is 4 additional years of work experience does not equate to a bachelor's degree. So I would have some concerns about that.
Commissioner, one of the things that we've found working nationally is that many times the degree requirements are an exclusionary process and actually have tended to screen out individuals who had tremendous amount of work experience but perhaps didn't have the academic background and credentials. And so we wanted to ensure, again, an inclusive process that would invite those individuals and then, let the process really take care of it from there, seeing how they stack up against other individuals that may have the academic credentials. But we wanted to be as inclusive as we could on the front end of the process, particularly.
Well, and I understand that. I don't disagree with that concept, but this is our top executive officer. And to me, that person needs to have a fairly strong educational background. And to me, going to college, yes, I know that's easier for some of us to say than others have the opportunity. I get that. But I'm just concerned, again, I just think this is a very important position, especially since it's our first position. And my inclination is I think we relaxed the standards too far in that.
And I would tell you from my experience, Commissioner, is that I think the applicants that we're going to see applying for this position, I would say the majority of them will have higher credentials than what we are asking for in our minimum qualifications, just from my experience in having done work nationally with many of the individuals who occupy these types of positions. But I would recommend not having as constrictive a requirement going in, and again, let the process, take shape.
I appreciate that. Thank you for helping us find our way in this space that is newer for this agency, to be more inclusive in our job descriptions, in our job classifications, in everything we do. These are our early days yet. The good news is it's been really tremendous to see the Emergency Operations Center and how they've gone about instituting a decision matrix that includes an equity frame.
That's awesome.
So we're really blessed. And I understand that we're the first EOC in our state to include an equity officer within the EOC as well. So we're learning by actually doing, and this is a very good step.
I have one more question.
Absolutely.
On the last line on the front page here, Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer exercises supervision over assigned professional, technical, and administrative support staff, including positions approved in the equity resolution and community engagement. I can't remember what those positions are, and I don't have that resolution in front of me. Could you refresh my memory, or I can go get the resolution and follow up with that?
I can do it. Those are the, excuse me, the 4 staff positions for the office, which is a data analyst, a civil rights officer.
That's okay.
Help me, John, out.
I get it. Now that you
Okay.
say that, I
Okay.
understand that.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. I just couldn't remember what we said in the resolution because it was
Sorry.
fairly lengthy resolution, so,
We were
Okay.
trying to use shorthand.
yeah. John, thank you, Chair.
2 comments. One, I agree with the commissioner's comments in regard to the high school diploma. I understand all the issues, but there's just too much body of knowledge to say you can gain it on the job. But I'm particularly interested in, after saying that, in the experience must include supervision and management of professional staff. Not very robust, honestly. If we're looking in my small company or most companies for somebody who is going to serve at this level, it's more than just supervising or managing professional staff. It's managing an organization or managing a department or managing something more effective than just professional staff. I could be a mid-level person, manage and supervise professional staff, but never have been involved in the involvement at a high enough level to do this, in my opinion. So, speaking only for myself, but I just don't think that's really what you want to get at.
Would you be more comfortable if it was worded as kind of executive level leadership?
I think it ought to be. I mean, you look at your pay range as an executive, the only chippy thing I'd say on your pay range, and I know that comes from the county, whoever looks at 47 cents or 78 cents. I mean, I look at a whole number, and I mean, if we need to bump it to 5.94 instead of 47 cents, and it just may be our pay range, but it looks a little silly for a professional.
Okay.
We'll convert that to an annual salary when we're done. That comes straight out of our payroll system is why you get the
Funny numbers.
weird numbers. Yeah, I tried to change it and it won't let me change it, so. We'll
Not
fix it though.
authorized.
Commissioner Treese?
I have a comment on the essential job duties. The first one, I would drop off develops and leads and just have it say leads the county in the development of a strategic DEI plan. I mean, you're not really developing the county, you're leading the county in the development of, I believe. And I think it's a stronger statement that way. That way you're opening up with a very strong statement. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner.
We'll make that
So,
note.
my comments, thank you very much, not only to the two of you as experts in your field, but also to our Chief Administrative Officer, who has brought his decades of experience in leadership of local government. He has worked through different barriers that we've had here in our agency to put this position description together. And I appreciate the leadership that he has shown and his can-do approach to get this done. I trust the expertise of our CAO and these consultants that we've brought on board. I appreciate that the qualifications are written so that we can throw our net wide and, as you say, go through the evaluation process to ensure that we have a good slate of candidates for this. When I first read the information in the packet, I was thinking, oh my goodness, does such a human exist with such expertise? But then I had to remind myself that we're trying to be clear about what we're aspiring to and be open to a variety of knowledge, skills, and experience. And I feel very well served and want to thank Mr. Rhodes as well as the two of you for bringing forward this job description and this process so that we will be successful in hiring a great person for this position.
Thank you, Chair.
Did you get what you needed today?
I believe so. This will be on the board agenda on the 26th for adoption of the position description and classification. It could be a consent item, but I've chose to put it as an action item, so.
Great. And I tell you, I am really amazed at Mr. Rhodes. He's really a Superman. It's been a very difficult time for us to, or for me, with everything that's been going on, and he has held up very well with all that we've been facing, and I appreciate it.
What an interim.
Yes. I've told him many times I wish we could clone him for a permanent. But thank you very
Great,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Next, we're going to go back to our COVID focus for the day. We have three different aspects to our response and preparations to this pandemic. The first with Sheriff Pat Garrett and Under Sheriff Sean Fisher. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Slide, please.
Next slide.
So we're going to walk through mitigation efforts to date to lower the risk of infection to staff while continuing our public safety functions, and then close with some comments about our reopening concept as we look into the future. Slide, please. Our countywide efforts really aligned with the governor's executive orders, Washington County temporary policies, and CDC guidance. The slide here is pretty self-explanatory. What I want to focus on are the bottom two bullets. First, the daily COVID-19 updates. You know, when you're facing an emergency, one of the tenets is communicate, communicate, communicate. And since February 29th, Under Sheriff Fisher has been sending staff the daily updates. They're kind of high-level EOC activities of the day, what we've learned from that day, from just a kind of a COVID-19 perspective, and then changes in our work groups. What's detectives doing differently today than they did yesterday, so that patrol and services can have an understanding for kind of their brothers and sisters in the organization, and how COVID's changed our functions, whether we're contracting or expanding. It's generated good questions from staff and helped us communicate in a way that resonates with staff, get them accurate information when they need it. The second initiative was home status. That's a wellness initiative, and it's really recognizing that deputies in jail and answering 911 calls are at elevated risks of community infection. And through a temporary initiative called Home Status Assignment, we took bold action early, March 21st, to say basically those who were not eligible to telecommute, right? And they were going hands-on with our adults in custody or face-to-face with people in the community. Home status assignment allowed them, if they worked their entire 2-week pay period, they could be assigned home status on that last day of their pay period. Generally, it fell on the last day. And it reduced the time that they were in community and at risk to virus spread. It increased time with their family. And as an added benefit, we saw a significant drop in sick leave among our records staff that work 24/7 and our jail services technicians. And that helped build confidence, maintain confidence that staff knew we were paying attention. We're paying attention, we're looking out for their health and welfare, and we care about them and their families. That's going to come to an end on May 30th as we grow our capacity back to a new normal. Slide, please. On the enforcement side, so our patrol and investigations divisions, briefings we suspended or doing them electronically or in larger spaces where we can spread out. Our self-initiated activity on the road, we just guided our patrol deputies, look, you're going to limit that self-initiated activity and that contact face-to-face where it makes sense. Take self-initiated activity when you need to. Use the phone when appropriate. And use common sense always. And that has paid off well for us. We're issuing criminal citations in lieu of taking many people to jail, which I'll detail a little bit more in a minute. But that together with the mitigation in the jail, knock on wood, has kept our staff healthy. Slide, please. With respect to the jail, I put 2 dates on top of this slide to basically illustrate that we moved early. February 6th, our medical staff began screening all arrestees for COVID symptoms. And on the 16th, as soon as we could arrange a criminal justice leaders meeting to coordinate what was really some decisive action to enable social distancing among our adults in custody and jail, we made appropriate releases of our adults in custody that had low-level charges, had priority to compromised immune systems, and we did thin the population in jail to keep that function viable into the future so that our adults in custody could have the physical distancing that we all now rely on to keep ourselves and our neighbors healthy. We closed a 60-bed dormitory pod so that no one's sleeping in a dormitory setting. They're not eating in a dormitory setting. They're in single cells, eating in a single cell, limiting movement within the jail facility. These decisions are not made lightly because it does reduce the capacity that we have in the jail. And I was on the phone with every police chief the weekend before we did that. Slide, please. We are having more common meetings with our criminal justice leaders, and we're expanding the tent, actually. Early in the, let's see here, that would have been late February, early March, we've got some inquiries from the ACLU, the Defense Bar, the Partnership for Safety and Justice. They were concerned about the health and welfare of our adults in custody. So we jumped on a Zoom meeting with them, and we talked them through the measures that we were taking, and they were very complimentary at the end of understanding the measures that we took. We posted those measures in great detail on our website for the public to see so they understand all of the measures that we're taking to keep people safe. And then our work crews, just one example, our work crews that we're helping in city parks and around the THPDR parks and other community outside work crews, they're staying in the jail and they're cleaning from one end of that facility to the next and then starting over. It smells like a doctor's office in there. Slide, please. Other points about the jail, extra soap, no charge. We're not charging for folks, our adults in custody who have concerns about their health related to COVID. They can see a medical professional whenever they need to. You know, we're making that happen. Our common areas all have soap, and we are encouraging people to wash their hands and stay clean. Before COVID hit, we were already working with our partners at the Health and Human Services to enable local aid and assist. That's defendants who are believed to be unable to aid and assist in their defense. Instead of getting stuck, I'll use that term, getting delayed in jail because the Oregon State Hospital is not accepting new patients in a timely manner, we worked with Health and Human Services to get local aid and assist evaluations. And since March 18th, we've done 10 of them. And the physicians that do these for us have a really quick turnaround with an evaluation report. It helps us move those in custody with some mental health factors through that justice system much more quickly than staying for weeks or months waiting for the state hospital to accept them. So that is actually a really good development that's hit at the perfect time, because when COVID hit, the Oregon State Hospital suspended accepting new patients. So we would have been stuck, but we're moving them through the justice system still in spite of that challenge. Slide, please. Services Division. Our Public Safety Training Center enables physical distancing in ways we didn't have before, so we can still have pre-academies on the classroom side. We're holding off on going hands-on until later, and we envision something like masks, gloves, maybe face shields. We're still planning how to do that, but we're moving ahead with the training that we can get done now in this current environment. Slide, please. Evictions for non-payment were suspended through the governor's order. We completely support that. We stopped tows for expired or missing plates temporarily because the DEQ testing centers are closed through May. Judicial foreclosures were suspended and into June because those can't happen without congregating people. So we're figuring out how to do that as part of our new normal. Restraining orders, we're still receiving those, though we're receiving them electronically rather than the hard certified copy, and we're still serving them in the community. We saw a drop in restraining orders of about 13% March and April, and they're back up. They're coming back up to what we would consider normal levels so far this month. Services Division, I'm sorry, slide please. On the forensic side, we stopped fingerprinting deceased people. We were doing that as a favor handshake for OSP to help clear warrants. Sometimes when somebody passes away, they have a warrant, we can clear them with fingerprints. We're just not doing that right now. It's not a priority, but it's just one small example of a interim, something we're doing. We've suspended, but we're gonna look to start that up again when it's more safe. Slide, please. Undersheriff Fisher will kind of talk us through our concept for reopening.
Right, so as we are figuring out how to undo some of these things that we've put into place in response to COVID, we have been spending some time thinking about what would be the strategic way to do that. And I want to just first say I've got this in phases 1, 2, 3, and I don't want that to be confusing with the the governor's plan for phase 1, 2, 3. Think of these more as just our steps, our sequential sort of incremental steps to getting back to something more normal, as the sheriff points out, our new normal. So in the first phase, kind of where we're at right now, we're continuing our health and safety measures. The next really big trigger for us is when the county moves from our phase 0 into phase 1 of reopening. We'll continue to maintain the health and safety measures we have in place at that point, but we will, and actually have already started increasing our adults in custody in the jail. We've opened that a little bit because we were only accepting A and B felonies. Now we're accepting C felonies. And once we're open into phase 1, governor's plan phase 1, we'll think about when is it appropriate to expand that to maybe A misdemeanors and just continue expanding. We just want that to go slow. And it really has gone slowly to this point. You can see mid-May, we were talking about opening an additional pod, and actually that happened this weekend. So pod 8, which was closed for quite a few weeks, was reopened over the weekend. It's a very low population right now. I think it's 15 or 20 people in there right now, so it's so small. But of course, that takes the same number of staff, whether it's full or not. So that was important for us to hold that off as long as possible. But we're at that point now. With regard to training, our enforcement recruits, we had a number of them that were just at the very beginning of their training when this whole thing broke loose, and we turned off their training because we just didn't want them to be in cars, side by side with their coaches in the very beginning when we were unsure and things were changing fast. But at that point, once we're in phase one, we'll start reevaluating and bringing those recruits back and getting their training back online. Same with our specialty teams who have a lot of training up close and personal. Again, we just want to take a measured approach to that. Our lobbies have been closed, and we intend at that point to start opening them. Of course, we're going to pay attention to barriers. There are a few places where we want to put up some temporary plexiglass just for added safety. Putting marks on the floor to help people know how far to stay apart. Those are all the kinds of safety measures that we will continue to have in place even in those early phases of reopening. And the sheriff already mentioned that our home status days, we've set the end of this month for the end of that program. Our staff have been very thankful for that, and I have heard no grumblings that we're going to be ending that. So I think they're just appreciative for having had the opportunity. Slide, please. As we move into the next phase, which really probably is just a continuation of that first phase, because what triggers here is the end of our county's policy, the temporary policy, which will end some COVID time and things like that. As we know now, we didn't know when we were putting this together, but we know now that that'll trigger when we move into phase one of the governor's plan. And so at that point, we're going to be looking at increasing our staff on site. That will mean we can do a little extra training. We'll start curtailing the telecommuting a little bit. And remove staff who were removed from their assignments because there was less of a need where they were at, and we moved them to other assignments where there was more of a need because staff were at home using COVID time and on home status days. We'll be moving them back into their normal assignments at that point. Next slide, please. And then this final phase for us really will trigger when the governor's order about social distancing begins to relax. And that's where we will, it's a little hard to tell, it's a moving target. So we're gonna play this by ear, but as we anticipate it, we'll continue PPE and temperature checks for people coming in and out of the jail most likely, and anywhere where it's appropriate for that to continue to happen. Our pod, the one remaining pod in the jail will continue to be closed to its normal use, but at some point in there, we will transition it to become a dormitory pod for those adults in custody who are getting ready to transition out of custody. So it'll be a sort of a halfway point from the jail, from the normal pods through there and out of the jail. We'll expand our programming for adults in custody. You know, all of the things that we've had to turn off in the meantime, you know, their programming for education, you know, GED prep, drug and alcohol programs, even our chaplain visits, inside the pods, social visiting, all of those things that have been turned off, we'll start to turn those back on. Again, this is going to be slow. It's going to be incremental. We'll do it as it makes sense. It's not like a light switch where all of a sudden it'll all come on all at once. We're going to do this as carefully as we can. Other things you can see there, all of just the normal things that we've had to turn off, we'll begin to turn those back on as it makes sense. And we're anxious to see what the new normal is going to look like, because we have had we've learned some things through this time. As the sheriff mentioned, having those home status days changed our leave use, sick time use. And that's an interesting thing we're looking at exploring. Telecommuting, our eyes have been open to some of the things you can actually get accomplished in very efficient ways from somewhere other than our office. So we're going to explore those things and make changes, or maybe just not change back as quickly where it makes sense. So that's really, the rest is really self-explanatory. That's just a nutshell of how we envision moving into the future. So I'll turn it back to the sheriff.
Love to answer your questions.
The only question I had was in terms of training, you got to have contact to train, and I understand that. When things dial up a little bit more, how about these recruits? How assured are you they're going to be around? Because I know that not everybody's beating your door down to be a policeman nowadays, so
Yeah.
they're joining any department.
Coincidental, yeah, Commissioner, thank you. Coincidentally, our July class is turning out to be a big class, like 18 between. They got to get through psych, so we'll probably lose just a couple, but I think the economy is going to help us, and they're hanging in there, and I'll just give you an example of some of the great teamwork. So we had about 5 jail deputies who transitioned to patrol. There are a few of those happen every year. They were early in their training. As the undersheriff said, we reassigned them back to the jail to help out. And I called every one of them personally and thanked them for being flexible to go, help out the home team there in the jail side. And they were happy to do it. And we're getting ready to send them back to the road.
Commissioner Treese?
Thank you for this update. I'm just curious, on one of your first slides, it said that you were doing screening on February 6th.
Yep.
So that was before the first case. So were you doing screening all along anyway? Screening means temperature check, is that right?
Right. Actually, screening does not mean temperature checks. That's a really great
Okay.
question, Commissioner. Thank you. Screening means fever, dry cough, travel outside the country. That was February 6th, was those, at that time, the CDC's suggested screening criteria. We started doing temperature checks on all our SDs, staff, volunteers, contractors, some weeks later, maybe 3 weeks later, late February. But yeah, early on, it was just those basic questions.
Commissioner Willie?
Realizing that we had to reduce our jail population, and as you say, in phase 1 here, you're going to start accepting C felony arrests again. And did we create some work for ourselves here by releasing all these folks early, realizing that they're probably going to come back and visit us at some point in time?
Yeah, that's really what I referred to, that these are really difficult decisions. Public safety in a jail is nested in public health. If we don't get it right on the public health side in a jail, then the public safety is out the door. So we had to balance that along with, enforcement in the community. And so right now, as the undersheriff said, we're accepting all felonies and a significant number of misdemeanors, anything having to do with sex crimes, domestic violence, or person crimes. But we still have, thefts are up. I mean, the DA Barton's doing a great job at tracking our recidivism that are largely related to this current COVID crisis. Thefts are up, and that's a quality of life crime that is a big deal for people. And so we are looking forward to being able to expand back somewhere closer to where we were. But it has contributed to, in some cases, I think, a spike. Now, I will also say I'm enormously thankful to the cooperation, understanding, partnerships from our mayors, our police chiefs, our police officers, even our deputies. I mean, they want to have someone in custody. You want to take them to jail, and so we're gonna get back closer to normal. But as the undersheriff said, we have to do it in a measured way.
I won't steal the DA Barton's thunder, but I think he has some ideas about how we can address that backlog of work that you're referencing. There will be a significant backlog because of the efforts that we've undertaken here.
We're experiencing some of that backlog ourselves with regard to the number of things returning on our agendas. Commissioner Scouten, did you have anything?
No, I'm good, thank you. Nice presentation, thank you. I'm pretty impressed with that you started that early with some initial screening February 6th. You're way ahead of a lot of people.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Well, I think it can't, I'm sorry. Chair, did
Go ahead.
I think it can't be overstated, the actions that you have taken to certainly minimize what could have been really catastrophic results there in the jail. So good job on that.
Thank you very much to the two of you. Not only have you and your command staff done a great job managing through this COVID crisis and our early aggressive response, we didn't know how hard this was going to hit our community, and you've managed through it very well. You've done a terrific job of communicating to everyone in our community, not just elected officials, but anyone in the community who had questions or had a gathering, an electronic, physical distancing gathering of people who had questions and a need for information. You stepped forward and helped address those needs, and I really want to thank you for it.
Thanks very much, Chair.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have our District Attorney Kevin Barton here on the COVID-19 impact on the criminal justice court system and related concerns. Welcome.
Thank you. Tough act to follow. Thank you for having me, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. I do have some slides that we can certainly use to help guide our conversation, but I do want to make this as conversational as possible. I think that's where it can be the greatest benefit to you and I can be the greatest help. So first, just maybe to set the stage, my hope was to follow up on a letter that I had sent to all of you on May 7th, and I hope that you've all had a chance to read the letter. I sent the letter well in advance of today's conversation, and so really, the letter is what I would normally have liked to cover during a conversation like this. It gives you an overall summary of what the DA's office operations are like, what we're dealing with in court, what some of our challenges are, both COVID-related and then challenges that exist independent of COVID but are obviously impacted by COVID. And then moving forward, how I'd like to see us move forward and address those challenges and get us into the future into a good spot. So I thought what I might do is start by sharing with you some numbers, and that's really what the slideshow takes a deep dive into. Before I get to the numbers, though, let me tell you that just like the men and women in the sheriff's office, the 130 men and women in the DA's office have really allowed us to move forward in the way that we have. We never stopped. We never shut down. We kept open, and obviously we were in a modified form for what we had to do. But as long as law enforcement was out there patrolling our streets and the courts were operating in some capacity, so too were we in the DA's office. And I can tell you that we proceeded forward with all sorts of hearings, so arraignment hearings, which is the initial hearing when someone learns what the charges are, grand jury proceedings, where we had grand jurors actually sitting here in this room initially for social distancing. Actually, it's a funny story because the very first time we brought them in here, they were so used to being crowded in a small grand jury room that they all sat in the front row all together. And we came in here and we said, hey, no, that's not the point. We want you to spread out. And so for now weeks, they've been meeting in your workroom and really appreciate having that opportunity. And these are, I love grand jurors because they are groups of our community members who come in here, and before they sit in a grand jury, most of their experience about what happens in our criminal justice system comes from TV. And so being able to show them more about what actually happens. Have any of you been grand jurors? Okay, Commissioner Treese. So interrupt me if I'm wrong, but
Absolutely right. Juror.
I've been a juror, but not a grand jury.
Grand juror.
so it's really a wonderful opportunity to just get a sense on what our community thinks about the process. And for me, I meet with every group of grand jurors at the end of their service. I've learned not to meet with them at the first day when they find out they need to be here for a month. But I meet with them at the end of their service really to do two things: to say thank you, but also to get the feedback from them. So they are my focus group. They are my community focus group to hear back, how are we doing? And I can tell you, they've been very pleased, not just with what my own office is doing, but the reflection on the community and on the county. So the other thing I do want to say is we've continued to do trials, and that has been a struggle. But I very firmly believe that if we're going to hold people in custody, which the jail is still doing, if people are going to be charged with a crime, then we need to maintain access to justice. And it's not enough to hold someone in to say, you can have your day in court when this is all over. So we've worked very hard with the court system, with the community partners like the Sheriff's Office and Community Corrections and the county facilities folks to find a way to do a trial safely. And again, if Costco can do it and New Seasons can, then I feel like we ought to be able to provide that essential function. And I'm proud to say that we've now tried 3 trials, and all successfully, a robbery case and then 2 child sex abuse cases. And that has worked well with some modifications. That leads me to where are we now in the DA's office and the court system. So we have been operating. We've been operating in modified capacity. So early on, once the schools shut down, we very quickly moved to a 3-day on, 3-day off schedule within the DA's office, where we have our attorneys and our staff working in 2 separate shifts, A team and B team. We did this because the court was reducing the number of hearings they had, so we could reduce the number of people we physically had in the office. We also wanted to guard against the possibility of cross-contamination in case one of our employees became infected. And we did have a couple scares with employees, but we've thankfully, knock on wood, had no one test positive for COVID. So we feel very blessed in that regard. Our attorneys were able to handle that modification quite well because we were set up to work remotely with attorneys with laptops. None of our staff had laptops, and all of our staff, though, were willing to use their own personal devices at home to remote access in. And so it's another sign, I think, of just the good, dedicated people that we have who gave of their own and didn't ask for the county to give more, knowing that resources were stretched quite tight. So we've been able to do that, although we are needing to ramp up again. And really, we're dependent in the DA's office on what happens in the court system. So the courts are dictated by the Chief Justice, who issues orders deciding what level of court involvement there will or won't be during the crisis. And as she issues different orders indicating which hearings will or will not happen, our presiding judge here in Washington County, Judge Beth Roberts, issues corresponding orders telling us, here's what you can expect. And so as those happen, in fact, the most recent order is set to expire at the end of this month, and a new one will come in place at the beginning of June. We modify our operations to adjust accordingly. So we anticipate we will continue to ramp up the number of people that we physically have here in the DA's office. Our grand jury panels, we had reduced the number of panels down from 5 to 2 panels. With the reduced caseload, but we're going to ramp that up probably again as we have more and more of these criminal cases that we're able to charge. And that's how I see us moving forward here into June, July, and August. I'm not going to get into the details of where there will and won't be plexiglass and blue lines on the floor in the courthouse, although if you were to walk into the courthouse now, you would find that with help from the EOC, the court has found a way to accommodate for social distancing, but still provide that necessary access to justice. I think now I'd like to jump into the slideshow. And again, please interrupt me, especially with these slides, because I think numbers can be the kind of thing that is helpful to generate conversation. So if we can advance to the first slide. It's difficult to see from where you're seated, I know, and many of these I referenced in my letter, but this is a good overall snapshot of what we've been seeing in the DA's office over the last 4 years. And the point of this slide is, when we talk about cases, you'll see that I sometimes refer to cases referred to the DA's office versus cases charged. So the universe of cases referred is always bigger than what's charged because we don't charge every case that comes in the door, just like the police don't send every case to us that they may interact with a person on. So what we've noticed is almost a 15% increase in cases to the DA's office referred to us over the past 4 years. And the last few years, actually, the increase has been, I'd say, more significant. We are roughly 12,000 cases a year, which is astounding at 1,000 cases a month for a county our size. If we can advance to the next slide. This is the total charged cases. So although we've had a roughly 15% increase in what comes in the door, we haven't had the same exact increase in what goes out the door, what we charge. But you'll see in the last 2 years especially, but in every year over the last 4, we've had an increase in charged cases of about 5.5% in the last 2 years. So that is also something significant, especially as we see our population. And the common theme that you'll notice throughout these slides is just about by every mark, there's been an increase in what we're seeing. Next slide is the domestic violence. And if I can pause for a minute and step away from the numbers, when we're talking about concerns over how COVID has impacted the business that we do, some of my primary areas of concern are surrounding vulnerable victims. So that would be domestic violence cases, child abuse cases, and actually elder abuse cases as well, or what we now call vulnerable adult cases. We've noticed changes in the demographics and the numbers surrounding those cases. And in a counterintuitive way, those numbers have gone down, which really increases my level of concern. So what we've noticed, for example, in DV cases, and you won't see this on this particular slide, but what we've noticed on DV cases is that there's been a drop. And the drop has occurred in many different areas. So there's been a drop in the number of DV calls for service to the police. That's people calling 911 or calling non-emergency. There's been a drop in overall referrals to our office for DV prosecution. There's been a drop in applications for restraining orders, which are non-criminal in nature, but they are an indication of people who are seeking out help when there's a concern about violence in the home. And there's different types of restraining orders, but there's been a drop in overall applications. There's been a drop in walk-ins to the Family Justice Center, and there's been a drop in people who've been serviced by places like DVRC. All of that is understandable given COVID, but what we know is that the recipe for things like domestic violence includes social isolation and stress. And those are two things that we all know are more prevalent today than they were this time last year. So I'm really concerned about that disconnect between what's being reported and what we believe is actually happening. And the same thing is holding true with child abuse. You'll see in some slides later on drops in what's reported, which are especially concerning. So this slide that we're on now is total DV cases referred to the DA's office. The takeaway here is that in just a 1-year period, we've had slightly over a 20% increase in cases referred to our office for domestic violence. If you advance to the next slide, this is the calls for service to police, perhaps too small to see from where you are, but what we did was we looked at the 3 largest police agencies in the county, and that would be the Sheriff's Office, Beaverton, and Hillsborough. And we were looking at comparing essentially 2020 numbers to 2019 numbers during COVID. And we looked really at January, February, March, and at the time it was April through the 20th. And although there are some variations, you'll see that overall there's been a decrease, as I mentioned a moment ago. Hillsborough did notice a slight increase in March, but then a more significant decrease in early April. And that coincides with the restraining order and 911 call number drops that I mentioned. If you look at the next slide, this is cases charged in our office. And this one, even before COVID, really struck me because you can see the arrow points to where our DA's office domestic violence unit was created. And this is comparing numbers from 2020 in red to 2019 in yellow. And I'm sorry, 2018 in red to 2019 in yellow. And what you'll see there is just the same moment our DV unit was created, there was a marked increase, a 44% increase actually, in the number of cases that we were able to charge for domestic violence. The next slide relates to child abuse. And again, this shows the same consistent theme that year after year, we're noticing an increase in cases referred and charged in our office. Here at 29, almost a 30% increase over a 4-year period for child abuse. But you look at the area that I circled there, and that blue line, which sort of moves in the upward trajectory, then plateaus, that's child abuse referrals during COVID. And so that is the wrong curve to flatten because that one, it's concerning when the referrals aren't coming into our office because it means obviously that there's children who are being abused and we're not aware of it. And the next slide gets at that same point. This one is calls to the DHS Child Abuse Hotline. So mandatory reporters, nurses, doctors, teachers, counselors, they're all people who are obligated by law, lawyers, to report child abuse if they become aware of it. The orange line represents 2020 numbers, and the blue represents 2019. And you'll see the very week that schools shut down, there was a significant 50% sudden drop in calls to the DHS hotline. And that drop-off has maintained. And so that, to me, is a very concerning sign about what's happening, because there's no way that all of a sudden we solve child abuse the same week COVID hit. These are Washington County numbers only. The same issue, though, is being replicated in the other counties around the state, but this is only Washington County.
Could I ask a question?
Please, yeah.
What percentage of your calls normally come from teachers? Do you know?
That's a good question. So I don't have that answer, and I can find that out for you. I can tell you that school personnel is one of the top reporting number of people. And so usually it's the counselors, so the teachers might hear of the abuse. Most schools have a procedure where they'll refer it to their counselor, who will then make the mandatory report.
I recognize the issue. I'm just trying to figure out proximity pieces as well.
Yeah, and I can tell you on this very issue, I had a conversation, actually Mayor Callaway called me on a Saturday night last week to ask me how I was doing, which I think was just great that he called. And we were talking about this very issue, and I told him my concern. Within 2 days, he had a Hillsborough administrator call me who was talking about how they were going to try and build something into their online learning platform so that students could report abuse if they had to report it. So my 3 children, for example, they're all on different platforms in the Sherwood schools, all at home bouncing off the walls, but there's different online platforms they have. And so there's no ready ability for them to report something if they need to. And so Hillsborough's been working on that. There was an NPR article last week, and I'm happy to forward this to you as well, about a national hotline, child abuse hotline, that has noticed an increase in calls. And the sad part about that is the increase has come from children self-reporting abuse, because now there's no adult to tell. So it's interesting looking at these dynamics and how they're impacted by COVID. And what we also know, not to go down this rabbit hole further, but what we also know is that many of the children who are abuse victims are disproportionately from areas of our society where they're marginalized, whether they're from minorities or socioeconomic marginalization. But we know there's a disproportionate impact on them as well, and that's bearing true here with COVID as well. Let's skip through here if you can skip through one more after that. This one shows CARES Northwest appointments. I showed you a similar slide at some other presentation at some point before today, I think, but this is updated. And what this shows is in the last 2 years, both for 2018 and now 2019, and moving here into 2020, which isn't on here, but it's holding true, there have been more appointments in Washington County than in Multnomah County. So Washington County is the purple and Multnomah County is the green. And you can see the trajectory that our county is going in. 779 appointments in 2019. Now, CARES experienced a drop-off of somewhere between 40 and 60% in appointments after COVID hit, although they're beginning to ramp up again. Unfortunately, although they had opened a temporary CARES location here in Washington County, they had to shut that down during COVID, which meant our children had to go to North Portland to get the child abuse medical attention and counseling that they needed. CARES has now been able to reopen that clinic, which is a really positive development, but we're still struggling with that. And the next slide is a different issue that I highlighted in my letter to you, but it's an issue that I'd say is completely separate from COVID, but it's still a challenge that we're dealing with, and that has to do with unsolved homicides. And so I'd like to take a moment maybe to talk about that for a minute. When I became the DA, I discovered in different offices within our office, there were some old files that had been sitting there and monitored, but really hadn't had the attention that was necessary. And this is true not just in my office, but in the different police agencies throughout the county. And it's through nobody's fault. It's just the reality that these cases get investigated, and sometimes we're not able to solve these cases. and then time passes. And the cases, though, because there's no statute of limitations on homicide or on murder, the cases remain active. They're never actually closed out. So we've accumulated over the past 30 to 40 years quite a few of these unsolved or cold cases. And so what we did last year was we did a study of what exactly an inventory, what do we have? And I can tell you that we have quite a few of these cases with quite a few victims going back to the late 60s. And we reviewed them to determine how many of these are potentially solvable. And we believe that there are 19 which are potentially solvable cases. And as I indicated in my letter, this issue was brought to my attention in a real personal way when I had a family member of one of these victims whose aunt was murdered as she was leaving work at Sears at Washington Square Mall in the mid-70s. And her aunt, walking to her car, was murdered. And she came up to me about a year ago now, and she asked me what was happening with the case and if there was any possibility, because of the advances in DNA technology, could something be done? And so that's what I mentioned in my letter to you. And it's an area where I think we really need to have some additional focus moving forward, because unfortunately, without that additional focus, as time passes, memories fade, evidence dissipates, and we won't be able to find justice for some of these folks. So that's something I wanted to make sure you're fully aware of, and I had put in my letter to you. And then jumping back into issues related to COVID, the final slide talks about property crimes. I recently actually did a press release, I think it was last week now, the days blend together sometimes, but it had to do with a troubling trend we noticed with respect to property crimes. And the trend we noticed is that, well, if you look at the overall numbers, the property crime numbers are actually less today than they were this time last year. And whenever I look at the impact of COVID, I like to look at essentially March and April and now May of 2020 compared to March, April, and May of 2019, just to get apples to apples comparison. Well, the numbers are fewer today, which makes sense because places like Washington Square Mall and these other areas of business are closed. But in certain areas of the county, they've spiked, and they're actually more. So proportionally, they're greater, even though numerically they're fewer. And an example of that would be in Tigard, there's a 60% increase in commercial burglaries, which is very concerning. And I spoke to the Tigard police chief. I spoke to a head of their commercial crimes unit. I actually spoke to a few loss prevention officers from larger retail stores and to some folks from smaller, more family stores. And what I've learned, and it's not just in Tigard, it's in Beaverton as well, many of these retailers are getting hit quite hard by people who are committing property crimes. And I'm not talking about people who are stealing bread or food to feed their family. I'm talking about people that are stealing out of greed and opportunity. So crews that will hit store after store, or people that will brazenly just push carts out of a store, or say to the loss prevention officers, you can't touch me because of COVID, things like that. So we're responding to that and trying to address that concern. And part of that is what the sheriff mentioned, which is tracking people who are committing these repeat crimes. I'm particularly proud that I've coined a new phrase. I've copyrighted it, but I'll share it with all of you. So you've heard of recidivism, which is the tendency to commit more than one crime. And you've heard of COVID, but if you combine the two, it's COVIDivism, which is, thanks for the polite laughter, which is people who commit crimes, multiple crimes during COVID. And it's actually a thing, believe it or not. And it's not just something we're noticing here in Washington County. So we actually have a report that we've been able to generate to track people who are released from the jail early, who are committing multiple crimes, and many of them are multiple property crimes, crime after crime after crime, or people who are using the jail's necessary but relaxed intake policies in order to commit crimes and thinking they'll get away with it. So an anecdote I can share with you is 3 weeks ago now, a police officer went to make an arrest of an individual who had been shoplifting from a Fred Meyer's. And the person told the officer, you can't arrest me because of COVID. The jail's not booking, shoplifting crimes. But it turned out that individual had a knife, and so he had committed a robbery. And so the officer was able to explain to him, well, you're being arrested, you committed a robbery. So the point is, there is an impact on COVID with respect to criminal justice and public safety issues, and it's impacting property, child abuse, domestic violence, elder abuse reports are down as well, and so we're tracking all of those things. I want to be sensitive to the clock. I don't see one behind all of you, so I'm not quite sure how much time I have. But why don't I pause now and answer any questions that you might have?
Commissioners, any questions of the elected district attorney?
Kevin, the only question I would have is that, and thank you for all your work. You don't get the best of cases. They're not these typical easy ones. You always have difficult ones. But what kind of money is it going to take for you to deal with these issues?
Well, thanks for asking that. Finances are tight, and I know that there are many needs and pressures on all of you. So what I can say is that I had asked the county for an increase in our staffing levels, a cold case homicide investigator, and then 2 support staff positions for this next year. And we had a conversation, and I feel very confident that the county was able to do what they could. But in talking to the CIO staff, it just wasn't possible for this year, and we will be fine for this year. And as I said in my letter, we are good for this coming year. But I can also tell you that we absolutely, not just in the DA's office, but in our public safety system, we need to make sure that we continue to invest and build that as the county grows. So as roads are built and public utility lines are built, we need to do the same thing with our criminal justice system. Otherwise, the same level of service that our community has come to expect, which I think is the level that they ought to receive, we won't be able to maintain that. And so, for example, today our levy is being voted on, and all of us obviously have our fingers crossed. When I came to you and we talked about the levy, I told you I was only going to ask for 1 position in that levy, 1 new position, and that was a new deputy DA. But that was because I planned on asking for positions in the general fund, which is not an opportunity now, I understand. I cannot sustain the same level of service that we provide in the DA's office with only 1 new DA position in the next 5 years' time. And so that is something that I want you to be aware of for your ongoing budget needs. But I'm not coming to you today asking for something right now because I understand that times are tight. Did I answer your question?
It's a nice answer.
All right.
Commissioner Willie?
I remember, and I don't know if it's in your letter or I've heard you make some of this presentation before, but the analogy of the person couldn't be arrested and they were carrying a knife, so they actually could. But isn't there a second tier to that you added, that the second theft would become a felony, and then you could arrest them because it's a felony?
Well, so thank you for asking the question, and that relates to the news release that we did last week. There's a provision of Oregon law that allows for the charging of a felony level crime for theft if the theft occurs during a state of an emergency in an area impacted by the state of an emergency. Normally, most theft crimes, the level, whether it's misdemeanor or felony, is dictated by the value amount of the item stolen, although not for all theft crimes. If you steal a firearm, that's an automatic felony. If you steal a pet, that's an automatic felony. If you steal livestock, that's an automatic felony. So not everything is dictated by value. If you steal something that's worth more than $1,000, that's value amount dictated felony. But during a state of an emergency in an area impacted by the emergency, the law does away with that value amount and just says theft equals felony. So that to me is a very broad brush. We did a more narrow policy, which is to say that if we have someone who's essentially using COVID to commit thefts, for example, stealing face masks, and we had a case involving that, or stealing PPE, or someone who is, let's say, stealing from a business which is more vulnerable because of COVID, like a closed business, barbershop, a bar, a restaurant, something along those lines, or a COVIDivist, a repeat property offender during COVID, then we will charge the second and beyond that theft, provided it's above a certain dollar amount threshold, $100 amount threshold, we'll charge that at the felony level. And I can tell you with the feedback we got from the community, not a single negative response. The community very, very much supports that.
Keep up the good work. I think between you and the sheriff's office, we got a great partnership there. So.
Thanks. I feel lucky to have the sheriff as a really good partner. So thank you for that.
I have one cold case when I first started that made an impact on me, and I've kept the newspaper clipping, and I will forward that on to you, and love to hear what
Please do. I'd love to look into it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Is it okay if I take this off? Okay, thank you. It's hard to breathe. I know, I've been wearing it for a while. I think I have a slide. Yay. Thanks for the opportunity to share about how WCCLS and our member libraries are responding to the COVID situation. Next slide, please. Our response, so I'm going to first cover how we responded to Stay Home, Save Lives. Next slide, please. So most WCCLS staff are teleworking, and we are busier than ever. That's all of our teleworking staff in the bottom, or not all of them, many of them, in the bottom right-hand corner. One of the first things we did was ask library users to keep their materials at home. And we're extending due dates, renewing items, and making sure that no one is assessed fines due to closures. We created a big new communication campaign of WCCLS Libraries Continue to help people easily connect with our digital services that are provided centrally by WCCLS. Next slide, please. We've seen massive increases in usage of our digital services. Digital library cards issued increased by 247% comparing this April with last April, and then just triple-digit percentage increases across the board. 435% increase in support questions answered by my staff. Next slide, please. Our library staff have been getting really creative in delivering all of their wonderful programming online. So the first row at the top is just some screenshots of various YouTube videos that our library staff have been putting together and online. We also have a lot of programs for adults going on. So we're doing things like live yoga, writers clubs, book clubs, parenting classes, financial classes, all that kind of stuff online. And for some of these, some of our libraries are saying they're actually getting more attendance than they did before, which is really great. And so some of our libraries have said they're really going to continue to offer a lot of online programming once we move on. Okay, next slide, please. Another sort of pivot that we made pretty quickly is we abandoned our normal summer reading program because we knew that I think it's almost one out of 6 Oregonians has lost their job. And there's going to be a lot more demand for free meals for kids this summer. And there's a lot of demand for access to physical books as well, which obviously we're struggling to meet when the libraries are closed. And so what we did was worked with our libraries to pool funds and staff resources to instead create a brand new summer reading program where we're basically just working on getting books in the hands of kids who are hungry. So we're working with summer meal sites for kids. Their locations are countywide, and the youth will receive a bag with an age-appropriate book, art supplies, and then an early literacy activity if they're in the early literacy stage. And so we are hoping to reach over 15,000 individual kids this summer with this program. Next slide, please.
I have to cheer right there. Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, it's been really exciting to see all the libraries come together to support this.
Those increased numbers are really impressive.
Yeah, it's what's keeping my staff going. They're putting in a lot of hours and buying a lot of books. Yeah, thank you. So that was just a super brief overview of how we've been responding, and then now I'm going to talk about how we are planning to dial up services in this new normal. Next slide, please. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is that libraries are really high-touch environments. You can probably see from the photos, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the ways libraries are really unique from, say, retail or restaurants. So one thing is that they're really high volume, and they're a two-way flow of goods. So we have books coming in, materials coming in from people's homes, and then going back out. Whereas retail or restaurant, it's usually just one direction that the goods travel. We saw last fiscal year 3.8 million visits to our library buildings, so they just get a lot of traffic. And our spaces are all designed for browsing, gathering, and in-person instruction. One of the really wonderful things about libraries, and one of the most heartbreaking things about this time, is that libraries are traditionally open to everyone, whether or not they feel welcome or face barriers in enjoying private sector gathering spaces like coffee shops, for example. So what that means is we serve many people with, say, mental health issues, they have cognitive challenges, things like that. And so they may not be used to, say, the new workflow at New Seasons because they're not shopping at New Seasons, but they're gonna come into the library and our staff have to help them understand the new normal when they maybe have been isolating at home and haven't seen that, if that makes sense. So there's more challenges in communication. And then, of course, we tend to see a lot more staff and customer interaction in libraries rather than retail. So retail, you usually grab your stuff off the shelf, you go check it out. In the library, there's a lot of, especially long interactions with assisting with technology is one example of where you spend a lot of time kind of leaning over someone at a computer, helping them navigate the FAFSA form, like the student loan, federal aid, things like that. It's a lot more one-on-one. And then, of course, all the furnishings, technology, and other objects are all high touch, and they're designed to be shared surfaces. And of course, libraries aren't built for food handling levels of sanitation. So like if you're a grocery store, and especially if you're a restaurant, you already have some sort of food safety incorporated in, and that helps a little bit, but libraries don't have that built in. Next slide, please. Libraries are also really high volume. These pictures are all from our courier warehouse, or our courier driver in the middle there. So our libraries own 1.6 million items. And then last year, over 10 million physical items were checked out in the last fiscal year. And this is a mind-blowing number. So right now, there are over 400,000 library items in people's homes right now, like a snapshot. So, it's crazy. So everyone had stuff checked out, and we've asked them to hang on to it for now. But we have to figure out how to get that all flowing again. So one of the gray totes in the picture holds about 30 items. So 400,000 items is approximately, it's over 13,000 totes. We usually sort about 330 totes, give or take about 10,000 items per day. So at that rate, if we did nothing but sort the items that are currently out, it would take us 40 days, which is appropriately biblical. I kind of thought the math worked out really well when I did that number. Not to mention that, and we've actually, I think my public health colleagues, they're my new best friends, they're advising us on safe protocols for handling library materials because there is no federal guidance or state guidance yet. There's organizations working on it, but they've recommended that we quarantine all library materials for 72 hours from once they come in because they all have plastic on them. So, even if it's the little, like the book jacket or the little sticker, the virus can live for 72 hours on plastic. So even if it's a paper book, there's plastic on it, and so we'll need to quarantine it for that long. Plus there's DVDs and all sorts of other good stuff. So, so then we have to figure out where we put all those totes full of quarantine materials that we don't touch for 72 hours. So each library in Washington County is operated independently by their city or nonprofit. And then WCCLS, we manage that technical and logistical infrastructure that connects these libraries. And so one of the big backbone services that we offer is this courier and materials handling service. Okay, next slide, please. So I wanted to share briefly about our one county-operated library, which is the West Slope Community Library. Next slide, please. And they're a good case study, I think, for especially the challenges that there's a number of really small libraries in the county and sort of the challenges that they face. So these are just some photos that maybe show how compact the West Slope building is. So West Slope, if you haven't been there, it's in the unincorporated West Slope neighborhood just up the hill from the Fred Meyer near Beaverton Hillsville and Shoals Ferry. It's made of 3 portable buildings joined together. It's on the site of the Raleigh Park Elementary School. It actually has the highest number of patron visits per staff FTE countywide. So that's about 18,000 visits per FTE. And so we actually had 142,000 visits last fiscal year to that really tiny building. And it actually has the second highest number of items checked out per square foot of real estate. And that's 41 checkouts per square foot, and that's actually 32% more than Beaverton, Maine Library. And so they saw 253,000 checkouts last fiscal year. They have 5 full-time staff and then one of the highest ratios of volunteer FTE hours to paid staff hours in the county. And a lot of their volunteers are wonderful elderly residents from the neighborhoods who aren't able to, obviously, they're staying at home where they should be. It's a beloved institution. Next slide, please. I've got a fun floor plan for West Slope. So this floor plan doesn't demonstrate all of the square footage that's occupied by the book stacks, so there's no shelves on this drawing, but there are over 50,000 items in the collection in West Slope. 34,000 of them are on the shelf in the library right now, and 13,000 are currently checked out in people's homes. Our county public health department has advised that we keep West Slope closed to the public in phase 1. West Slope does continue to provide excellent service to the community online, and we are currently exploring creative ways to get our physical collections out into the community in other ways. Some of the things they're doing online, appointments, where a librarian will walk you through how to use Zoom, how to use ebooks, anything you want to know, they'll just get on with you on the phone and walk you through it. They did 45 of those in April. They've been doing live yoga, story times, bird watching, financial advice, all sorts of good stuff. I just wanted to point out the 700 square feet for all staff and materials handling. So that's where the book drop comes in. And so, yeah, that's 5 FTE and 13,000 books. So we've got some logistical hurdles to overcome, but we've got a great team working on it. Next slide, please. And so now I'm going to talk about the shared reopening framework that we're working on at the cooperative. Next slide, please. It might be. It's not
And
big.
It's also, it's 700 and, it's, the square footage is there, but it's also those 3 portables put together, so they're kind of a little bit like jigsaw puzzles.
Yes, they are. Yes. So we had some goals for our reopening framework. Like I said before, all of our libraries are operated independently, but they all rely on this one backbone of service. So it's a little bit tricky. We can't just all agree we're all going to do this at the same time. So the goals that we agreed on are that it needs to be a gradual, phased, and it's a framework that can be dialed up or dialed down as needed, because we know that public health conditions may mean that we need to go back a level, and hopefully not, but that's a possibility. Because each library is operated independently, we needed to support an approach of coordination, not synchronization. That's our theme, by developing this sort of common language and stages of service that we can use to communicate with each other. WCCLS is the backbone, and so it's important that our libraries understand under what conditions and at what point we will resume or resuspend our centralized services. We have some high-risk staff, for example, in our courier team. We have staff at the EOC. So we've got constraints that we're working within as well. And of course, the framework is incorporating wonderful guidance from our colleagues in Washington County Public Health that we're very grateful for. Next slide, please. We had a really fun and intense collaborative and participatory process. This is a screenshot of the online work that went into wrangling, developing this framework. So over 1.5 weeks, we hosted 9 focus groups online, each with about 30 to 40 staff attending from all libraries and all levels within each organization. So I just confirmed just before this, over 145 unique individuals around the county from our libraries contributed to the development of this framework. Our libraries and our communities are so different, and so we need to make sure that everyone's voice is part of the process. A smaller group then spent many hours over the last 2 weeks pulling all of that input into a 10-page document that takes into account all of the logistical changes that WCCLS and our libraries will need to make and the challenges that we'll be addressing. Next slide, please. So the next steps, the library directors are reviewing the draft this week as we speak, and they will hopefully finalize it on Thursday. The libraries are all also currently working with their local jurisdictions and planning for what Phase 1 for the county will mean for their library in line with the shared reopening framework. Libraries know we are hearing a lot from our community that they are keen to get access to our physical collections. And so libraries are working hard locally to plan ways to facilitate that safely within the constraints of their staffing, their building size and layout. Keeping equity in mind, that's another important issue. And also public health is consulting with them to, as they develop their workflows. And that was my last, oh no, next slide, sorry. I wanted to give the last word to our users. I just wanted to share some of the lovely comments we've been getting on social media over the last, looks like 5 weeks from Facebook. So a lot of appreciation for what we have been able to offer to our community during this time. So I want to end on a really positive note. We miss all of them and they miss us, and we are looking forward to moving forward, whatever that means.
Yeah, way back when, and I missed the first couple slide, and you were talking about the summer reading program and that you converted that, and that's the part that I really wanted to hear because I now have a 5-year-old in my home for the next 2.5 months. He has 2 weeks of school. He's from New York, and he's got 2 weeks of school, so he's literally online in school at 6:30 in the morning.
Oh my God.
But he's got 2 more weeks of that, and then we want to transition to some sort of a summer reading program. And I'm reading the comments down at the bottom there, so I guess I need to connect into some sort of a summer reading program. And with that, I was remembering as mayor, a group of us used to periodically go to the Hillsborough library and read books to kids.
Yes.
And it was kind of fun because we got to be animated and all that. We got to pick our own book, or it was given to us, you know. Is there any of that thought that maybe we could still do that through Zoom or some sort of community time that, you know, we could read to kids, or somebody could read to kids, or maybe a book list of where I need to access appropriate books for my 5-year-old.
Absolutely. So when I shared what we're doing at the meal sites is really our attempt to address some of the equity issues around like the digital divide for summer reading. And so we absolutely, I think our libraries are all working on what summer reading means for their local patrons who don't have as many barriers, so who have, you know, online access and devices and all of that. So they are doing story times online now. Some of them are live, so the kids can actually engage. I sat in on one with Westlop, and it was pretty adorable. So they are doing that stuff. And then they're working on, some of them are thinking about doing things like take and make, so like activities that people can pick up at the library potentially, and then, but not congregate at the library and then like go back home, so sort of STEM and STEAM activities. And then there's gonna be a lot of summer reading. Reading for pleasure, I think, is such an important message, and so we will continue to work on that. There's gonna be an online component to that as well. We're still figuring out the details, but yeah.
If I wanted to be, have access to all of that information, would I? You and Elizabeth. Anyway, so is it on the WCCLS website, or would it be on, like, for me, the closest library would be Hillsborough?
The best thing to do, what we did was transition our events calendar. So if you go to wccls.org and there's a little banner at the top of the page, it says like, we continue to serve you while you're at home or something like that. And if you click on that, the first link is a link to our events calendar. We actually deleted all of the in-person events because they're not happening. And we made a way for all of our libraries to input all of their online offerings into our events calendar so people can easily see what is happening day by day and then also location by location. Even though you're not going to a location, some people have their favorite librarian that they still want to see story time from. And so that's a way for them to find them. So yeah, you'll find Hillsborough's events on our website. Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Good job.
Thank you.
Keep it up.
My question would be, with all of the additional costs you're going to incur for distancing, wiping things down, doing various things. Do you have any idea throughout the system, including the one that's not in your system, but is part of, our shared group, what kind of costs we're looking at?
No. To be totally honest, I don't. I think for PPE and stuff, that would be on the local libraries to, they're going to be working with their cities or with their jurisdiction to figure out what that cost would be. What we're doing in terms of our framework is we're getting the public health guidance and the sanitation protocols and then sharing that with the cities. And then it's up to them to sort of figure out how they want to implement that, because depending on the level of service delivery that they do, it would require different levels of PPE and sanitation. So we don't have a cost estimate for that. I do know that we've shifted tens of thousands of dollars of our resources at WCCLS to meet the ebook demand, for example, and to do this equity-based summer reading initiative. But in terms of the cost of the PPE and sanitation, that is not something I've got.
Urge you to do that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm hoping that with the summer coming, that perhaps at West Slope and others that have access to outdoors, that there can be some summer reading and some things outdoors with the appropriate distancing and that type of thing.
Absolutely. We're
I'm sure
exploring.
you're way further ahead on that.
We're looking forward to it. Thank you.
So I have a couple of things. Maybe the softball one? Well, no, that's not true. So you talked, maybe I'm remembering our work session of just the last week or so, but you've talked about protocols for having material handling protocols, but also in the libraries. And I think in our work session, you mentioned some organization that you were looking towards. And I'm wondering, so why is it taking so long to define those protocols? To get some guidance?
Yes. You mean from the feds or wherever? Yeah. Yes, I know. Well, so our wonderful public health staff have been basing everything they're finding on current research. So the Institute of Museum and Library Services is a federal agency. They're working with a big, huge library kind of conglomerate called OCLC. Acronym doesn't matter. And with a private firm, it's a public-private partnership. And the timeline that we've heard, the initial timeline for the research is sort of May through August is when we'll hope to get the first sort of protocol. But I think that no one's just ever tested this before.
Yeah.
So I know they're working with huge systems like, I think it's LA County Library or LA City Library, one of the two. Either way, it's massive. The amount of touches that a library book has on its journey, through a system is enormous. And I think just no one's ever researched it before. And so I think they're trying to figure out, it's not so much, I don't think, the actual science part of the testing. It's almost just like figuring out how do we set up the test in the first place, just because the workflows are so complex, is my guess. Yeah.
Well, that all makes sense. But I'm so anxious for the libraries to get going again, even if it's for low-touch return, but then a low-touch, even a curbside service for materials without having the library buildings proper, fully open. So as you were talking about just the material return volume, given what's checked out, would take 40 days of processing. My mind was racing, thinking about different solutions that are not unique to me by any stretch of the imagination. But I certainly hope through the direction and support that we as a board have provided to our CAO that you would, through WCCLS, rent the trucks, hire the temporary employees, find out how to rent more totes. We certainly have public service workers throughout our region that have been furloughed and laid off that would be more than happy, from reports that I'm hearing, more than happy to have some meaningful work to do during this time because they're public servants, right? And that would help them in their spirit and would help WCCLS. And that those costs would be reimbursable through the Coronavirus Relief Fund. So I know I'm probably stating the obvious, but hopefully you are, this is my trying to ask it as an open question. Do you feel fully empowered to put together those processes as quickly as possible? I'm really worried about the summer slump and having our students be engaged all summer long and getting ready for a new academic year because they've lived through such disruption of their current school year.
This whole generation, it's going to be really interesting. I know that our libraries, they're all in different stages, but they are all working, I think, more or less on some form of we're calling it takeout instead of curbside if you don't have a car. But those plans are underway, and those are, again, depending on each city and their staffing and their buildings, so I don't want to say, but they're all thinking about creative ways to get people getting access to our physical materials for sure. I should clarify, when I said 40 days of nonstop sorting, we won't actually do that. I mean, it was just to give you a sense of the scale of how many materials we have, but we're working with the libraries to sort of chunk it up incrementally. So, and we'll probably, at the beginning, while we work on our backlog, use the books that are on the shelves in each library to fulfill requests. So we're coming up with creative ways to make sure that we're not swamping ourselves, so we can manage it, but it's just a lot to figure out. But this is the strength of our cooperative, right, is that we have all these wonderful staff in these buildings across the county, and they're ready to go and make it work. So.
Well, it's a real can-do group, and I applaud their spirit and all of the extra care and time that all of the library personnel have put in order to have programs and resource availability for all of our community members. It's just been stellar. So I fully applaud the continued creativity in order to define our new normal.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would just like to add, we talk about children, and we talk about the need for the libraries for the children, but our elder community, our isolated communities, I mean, it is very important for children, but it's also important for the entire community. I think that's what you were saying.
Yep.
But, and I know even your volunteers are feeling left out here.
Absolutely.
And I know that that's the case as well. So.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. I mean, we serve the most vulnerable in our community, and that also means they're the most vulnerable to this virus. And so libraries have to get really creative in what we can do to support everyone.
Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
And let's keep our fingers crossed.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, that completes our COVID edition of today's work session. And now we continue on with 5 remaining items for the afternoon. Would folks like to take a break now, and then we'll reconvene for the next agenda set?
How many? Are we still a little ahead of schedule or no?
Well, we have a break planned in the next 20 minutes.
Yes, we are ahead of schedule.
Okay. We'll just go to item 9 and stick to the current timeline. So,
Oh, then we're way ahead because we had the break programmed into the schedule.
Right.
That's fine, we have people here.
Yeah, they're sitting here.
yep. Item 9, appoint members to the Washington County Aging and Veteran Services Advisory Council. Hello there, Ms. Miller, Rebecca Miller.
Hello.
Rebecca's our Division Manager of Disability, Aging, and Veteran Services.
Good afternoon. So I'm Rebecca Miller, Supervisor for Disability, Aging, and Veteran Services, as you just stated. At the June 2nd board meeting, we'll be asking you to appoint 5 new members and 1 alternate member to our Aging and Veteran Services Advisory Council for a 3-year term that ends on June 30th, 2022. 23. I can't believe we're thinking that far ahead. The 5 new members we're requesting are Gary O'Neill, Jessica Cassidy, Yaroslav Kacharyavenka, Aaron Miller, and Robert Newton as the regular members, and then Chris Wiley as an alternate member. So I'm going to provide a brief bio on each member for you. So Gary O'Neill is with District 2. He's a Marine Corps veteran, a former Peace Corps volunteer, and has extensive experience with programs and services for older adults. He's had a very impressive career and brings know-how of board service, program monitoring, and he's worked in anti-poverty, housing, as a tax preparer volunteer. He's worked with the foster grandparent program and much more. He also is a bilingual Spanish speaker. Jessica Cassidy is also with District 2. She's a nurse and a healthcare administrator. She's been serving older adults for over a decade, first as a CNA, then as an LPN, and now as an administrator in a memory care community in Portland. She's worked as a travel nurse in 6 states. She also has previous experience as a family caregiver and is interested in working at a systems level now to affect positive change for older adults and veterans. Yaroslav Kacharyavenka with District 1. He's a retired engineer from the Ukraine. He's the president of a Russian-speaking club called Faithful Friends here in Beaverton, which is part of the Russian-American Public Center of the Northwest. The majority of the members there are older adults, and they represent 16 different nations. He wants to help older immigrants understand social services and help them succeed here in the U.S. You actually had the chance to meet him during the Older Americans Month proclamation earlier. And so he's also been helping carry back messages to the Russian-speaking community throughout COVID-19 response. So he's been forwarding and helping identify issues and need for more communication. And then Erin Miller with District 1. She works at Metro West Ambulance and has worked in the field of medical transportation for 30 years. Her resume includes time spent working with Senator Wyden as well. She has 3 sets of aging parents in their 80s, including 1 veteran, so she's no stranger to the needs of older adults, veterans, or people with disabilities. Robert Newton is with District 4. Mr. Newton is a 30-year resident of Washington County and a veteran of the U.S. Army. He's an attorney and writer with comprehensive legal experience. When he was in law school, his work-study placement for 2 years was as an assistant to the veterans representative. He is civic-minded and provides both financial and emotional support to veterans with PTSD through various veterans organizations in his spare time. And then Chris Wiley, District 3, is a retired 20-year Air Force veteran, a family caregiver, and has volunteer service on the City Aging Advisory Councils in Tigard, and I think a standing application for Sherwood. I might have that reversed. It might be Sherwood now and Tigard later. But she's jumped right in and even helped to draft that Older Americans Month proclamation earlier this month. So each of the appointees have attended at least one AVSAC meeting. They've interviewed with AVSAC and Dave's staff, and the AVSAC has unanimously voted to recommend them to you for your approval. And I'm really pleased with the pool of potential members. They represent many disciplines, all the districts across the county. They have lived experience as older adults, veterans, people with disabilities, and as caregivers. Well, I'd be happy to answer your questions, but first I just wanted to acknowledge Janet Long, who's behind me. She provides support to our AVSAC, and I just want to take this opportunity to give her kudos for the great work she does to retain and support our advisory council. I get so many emails and support, people just sing her praises all the time, so I'd like the opportunity to do that in front of you all. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you. Any commissioner questions or comments?
No, sounds good.
You did a good job of explaining who the applicants were. Thank you.
Yes.
So we have, our next meeting is Thursday morning, and that's going to be a Zoom meeting, I'm assuming?
Yes, what time is it? We moved the time. We had to move the time because it conflicts with our state networking meeting. So it's 12:30? 12:30, yeah. And Zoom.
Okay, that hasn't made it to my calendar yet.
Okay, we can get you the info.
Yeah, please do, and, all right. Yeah, and we have to approve these, I guess, in the next board meeting. So they're
June
not
2nd.
official until, June 2nd. Okay. Yeah, that's what I was asking.
But we've put them to work in anticipation of your your support
Yeah.
as volunteers.
Well, I certainly, I've known Erin for a long time, so I'm happy to see her come
Great.
on board. So.
Great. Any other questions?
I would just like to add that this is a terrific suite of volunteers offering their experience, more importantly, their time, to contribute to their communities. Just an incredible pool of
impressive, isn't it?
folks. And I feel really grateful to have such community support to serve in this capacity. So thank you for putting it together, for encouraging folks to apply and to seek these opportunities. Job well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. All righty, next, if we have staff here,
No, you're,
Right there.
you,
okay?
okay.
Do we have, I see Comey's,
Leah's here.
Oh,
I'm
Leah right
sorry.
there.
Leah's
our
right here.
next one.
Sorry, it was my mistake. She's here.
It's quite all right. Okay, hello, Leah, come on up. Leah Perkins Hagley for appointing members to the Fair Board.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. It's nice to see you all today. Again, I am Leah Perkins Hagley, the venue manager for formerly the Fair Complex, now the West Side Commons. And today I am here before you with a vacancy on the Fair Board. We have a midterm vacancy from Erin Carroll, who was on the Fair Board, and she resigned late last year. And so we have 4 applicants here before you today, 4 excellent applicants who I have had an opportunity to chat with all 4 of them in the last week or so. And I think that we've struggled for many years to get applicants for the Fair Board, and the fact that we have 4 really, really great applicants is really encouraging. And so it's one position. It does expire in 2023. I had a misprint on your paper, so it says 2022. It's actually 2023. And I'll just go over very quickly. I know you have their applicants, but I just wanted to share a little bit of what my conversations with them were. So 2 of them are graduates of the Washington County Civic Leadership Academy, and they are really looking forward to getting involved in Washington County boards and commissions, and they have applied for several other boards as well, but are really hoping to be selected for the Fair Board. Nancy Thomas works for the state of Oregon as an auditor, and she is a longtime fair goer and resident of Hillsborough, and she thinks that the Fair Board would be someplace where she could use her budgeting and finance skills on the Fair Board. Ajoy Nevin has been a resident of Hillsborough for 12 years, and he works for Intel, but I think the most important thing to note about Mr. Nevin is that he is highly involved in a nonprofit Indian cultural organization with a lot of event planning experience. His organization and him specifically plan a lot of cultural events, and he would like to bring his cultural event production skills to the Fair Board. And we had a long conversation about his excitement about the things that he feels he could bring to the Fair Board and to the Fair in general.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
As you were interviewing these folks, it's my understanding that this board also asked for a position for the Fairgrounds Advisory Committee. And so I've been waiting for that as well.
So this, we do have, I think, 2 positions for the Fairgrounds Advisory Committee that we need to bring to you. But we do need to get a FAC meeting scheduled first because it would require a bylaw revision. And we had a FAC meeting scheduled right before COVID shut us down, so we are still working on getting that rescheduled with the chair.
Right, but really my ultimate question is, so as you were talking to these folks and thinking about their experience, when I was looking at this suite of applicants, I was also thinking about that broader Fairgrounds Advisory Committee. So, you know, I can't help but think about that.
Yeah.
The fair is one event a year, whereas there's the entire facility and all that it contributes to the community.
And I believe, I know one of these applicants for sure, Nancy Thomas, applied for both of those boards, and she, her and I talked about the FAC as well, and she's just really excited to be somehow involved in the fairgrounds, whether it's the Fair Board or the Fairgrounds Advisory Committee. Yes. And then the other two applicants, one of them, Mitch Nussbaumer, he actually works for Clean Water Services. He is an FFA alumni from Hillsborough, and he is a 4-H parent, and he did come to the last Fair Board meeting. No, not the last one, it was the one before that in January, and requested information about how to become a Fair Board member, so he did apply. And he really would like to be part of the Fair Board, representing 4-H and FFA. And then finally, we have Balpreet Singh. He is really interested in the fair budget as well, budget and finance, but also really finding about how to get more youth involved besides 4-H and FFA at the fair. He feels there's a lack of youth involvement in general outside of those two organizations. So he has a lot of great ideas. So you've got 4 excellent applicants that we can select one position from. But your point, Chair Harrington, is that I know at least one of them did apply for one of the other boards as well. So when we bring that suite back to you for those, maybe we would have the opportunity to select one of these if they don't get selected for the Fair Board. But I will be coming back to you on June 2nd, so if you have any direction specifically on one of these applicants that you'd like to provide, that would be great.
Commissioner Treese?
Thank you. I just have a couple questions. Number one, the current members are all men, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and we have, is there one female that's in this applicant pool?
Yes.
Okay. And number two, there's nobody besides District 4 and District 1.
2. There's 3 of them are District 4 and one's District 2. Oh, you mean on the current board? Yes, you're correct.
Members?
You're correct.
The current members.
Yes, sorry,
And so I
yes.
was thinking about the need for wider geographic representation.
Yes,
So
correct.
those are two issues that just popped to my mind when I look at this list.
Yeah.
And I can see that perspective from my standpoint, given that this is the fair, and the fair is pretty much out of the roots of our agriculture community, and does have value for the wider community, but I think it is really the capstone for our agriculture community. This is one reason why, as I was looking at the richness of this application pool, I was thinking about that wider Fairgrounds Advisory Committee. And I think it's really important that we honor our agriculture community and recognize that we have an active agriculture member with roots in the agriculture community and a real passion for continuing public service, and honor our agriculture rural constituents. So I know I'm very comfortable myself in seeing Mitch Nussbaumer advanced at this stage, and I would love to see these other 3 pursue the Fairgrounds Advisory Committee. But I didn't mean to jump in front of everybody else. So, sorry, I just did.
I was going to say, I don't know, sounds like you're poaching or something.
No, I didn't mean to.
I know.
I was picking up on the suite of who was already on it. So, my bad, sorry.
No, that's fine, that's fine. I was just giving you a bad time, and it's good to know, I guess, your thoughts on that. I don't have a thought right now, but I will communicate that.
Okay, great, thank you. All right.
Okay, so usually we give our staff an indication on appointments in our work sessions so they can draw it up for the packet for our board meeting. Are we saying we want to come back to this in a future work session, provide that feedback, and then go from there, or?
Yeah, I'd prefer to hear from Jerry about what his thoughts are. We've always kind of deferred to the person who's on that board.
Okay. All right, well, I will give you a couple more weeks and come back to work session in 2 weeks. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Okay, great, thank you.
The county administrator can help with the timing. I don't know what the rolling agenda looks like for a couple of weeks.
I'll work with them. I think I'm back in 2 weeks anyway for a work session for Event Center anyway.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda is to appoint members to the Housing Advisory Committee. Hi, Comey.
Hello.
Thank you for hanging out with us this afternoon.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Komi Kalaro. I'm with the Housing Services. I'm here before you to ask for your consideration for 4 appointments to the Housing Advisory Committee, which we know as HAC, H-A-C. So the HAC is 15 members. They are appointed to 4-year terms, and they have affiliation or experience with housing or housing services. So for instance, we have social service organization member, we have people in finance or lending, we have design and architect and engineering people. So they get into the details of what we do, whether it's a voucher or public housing or development. And then there is 4 members that are at large. So this is where we can appoint to the committee members who do not have an affiliation, but some experience that we like. So the positions we are trying to fill is 2 at-large positions, 1 minority group, and 1 social service. So request to appoint Renee Browse and Eric Schmidt to the member at-large positions. Ms. Renee Browse is the executive director of the Good Neighbor Center in Tigard. So she's intimately involved with our homeless work. And we interviewed her. She's happy to join. She's visited us and attended some meetings. So we're thrilled that she actually did apply. And because homelessness, which is the next presentation, is becoming an issue more and more. Mr. Schmidt is a communications manager with experience in broadcast journalism. He currently works with City Talk. I believe during his interview, he's interviewed some of you. Yeah. But his interest is more in behavioral health. But because housing is a strong determinant, a social determinant of health, he applied for the HAC position. So, but his main interest is in behavioral health. Very engaging fellow and very excited and long-time Washington County resident. He's worked before for the Association of Oregon Counties and has volunteered for Thrives, Washington County Thrives. The third person for the minority representative is Mr. Balan Yunus. Mr. Yunus is a Kurdish immigrant, and he speaks Arabic, Kurdish, and English. His professional experience is HR management, and he wants to get a lot of immigrant families more involved with the county. So that's what he said in his interview and application. Also very excited to be part of housing. He asked very good questions, and we're excited that he applied. And then our 4th appointment is a reappointment for Catherine Gallian. She's a social service organization that's Community Action, strong partner of ours in our work. She was appointed for only 2 years because we tried to stagger their term. So even though Housing Advisory Committee members get 4 years, she drew the short straw and got 2. So we want to reappoint her, and she happens to be the chair this year. So there's a lot of arguments why she should be reappointed. And we have 2 other vacancies that we are still working on. A veterans representative, our veteran, the gentleman moved to Central Oregon recently, and we don't have an applicant yet. And
Well, maybe Rebecca Miller and her teammate can help you with that.
Yes, we haven't reached out to them yet, but we probably should. And then Housing Authority Program participants, so somebody who is on our Section 8 program, we have 2 positions for them. We have 1 filled and 1 vacant, and because of COVID, we are not seeing them in person these days, so it was kind of hard to recruit. So those will be 2 that will be coming back later. So with that, I'll take any questions you have.
Commissioners, do you have any questions?
Sounds good.
once again, a great slate of applicants, and I really appreciated the recommended slate that you've brought forth as
Thank you.
well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and they were a joy to interview. I mean, we had questions, but we let them talk, and so be a lot of help for our work.
That's great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Comey, for bringing that to us for future board action.
All right.
Now, I know we have a big topic to get into next, also with Comey and will Annette Evans be joining you
She
today?
should be
Yes,
here at 3 o'clock.
So
You've
we're
been so
going-
efficient, you got way ahead of your schedule. If you could take a short break,
Yeah.
then we'll be ready to go.
Yeah, I think it would be great. We'll take a 15-minute break, and then we'll just have the last two items for our work session.
All right.
Great. So we'll come back here at 3:25. Will that work for Annette? Oh, I hope you didn't rush. Okay, see you in 15. we have anybody hanging out on Zoom with us still?
We do, Madam Chair. We have 7 people on.
Wonderful.
A mix of some staff there and looks like some residents.
Wonderful. All righty. Well, we're back from our break in our work session, and we only have 2 remaining agenda items, but I know our County Administrative Officer, Mr. Rhodes, has some information he'd like to share with us as well.
Thank you. Just quickly, a brief update. The county administrator in Clackamas County and I have been communicating back and forth all morning while the both boards were discussing their application to the state. And while we indicated we would apply on Friday, their board has decided they are making their application today. So we'll be Friday there today. So we're close. They still will probably reopen the same time as we do, but they're decide to apply now.
And if I might, one of the main reasons why I understand that you're proceeding with a Friday date for us is that correlates to the work that your staff is doing to staff up per the presentation we saw today.
That's correct. That's the earliest that public health will be comfortable that we have staffed and met that minimum requirement for it. And they're very uncomfortable until we know we've got that, making that application. So that's why we're going to wait.
It's very sound. I stand behind you.
And the other thing is, some of you have heard issues at the Murray building regarding election ballot drop-off. And we even created quite a traffic jam all the way back to TV Highway on Murray. So we've, since about just before noon, we've been staffing that site with people, and we will continue to staff it until 8 o'clock. We also now have a plan in place on how we stop the line at 8 o'clock, because you know that's always an issue. And so that's all been put in place and will be carried out the rest of the day.
Thank you. And I hope that all of the staff involved will be safe and healthy, not only because of COVID and physical distancing, but also out and about in traffic, safe as well.
Yeah, we have the sheriff's office there assisting as well, so.
Traffic has always been an issue at that
Yeah.
spot, and now
Yes.
we don't have the benefit of the west side parking lots from the Kmart and other earlier facilities with a large parking lot. So we have no place for southbound to go except to circle around, I guess, and come back on the east
Yeah.
side of Murray. So.
Yes.
And I do realize that this is very unique, that given, because of COVID, we don't have the usual drop boxes inside of different library buildings and things like that. So it's rather difficult. So it has added additional pressure to the county's East Service Center on Murray Boulevard. So thank you for all of your patience and your willingness, staff. I really appreciate it.
And thank you, Steve.
Yes. So onward, turning it over to Comey Calavar, our Director of Housing Services, and Danette Evans, our Homeless Program Manager Extraordinaire. Glad to see you out of the Emergency Operations Center.
It feels good out here, but I'm adjusted to that climate, so I'll reclimatize myself.
Take it away.
And Deputy County Administrator Ruth is in the audience in case there's questions about budget.
She's got the hot seat over
got the
there,
hot
is what
seat,
you're
yeah.
telling us.
You heard it. Good afternoon, Commissioners. So our topic today is homeless camping, and I will take the first couple of slides, and then Annette will come in with policy and program recommendations, and then more detail. So next slide, please. So government agencies, we are dealing with camping issues, rights of way, and homelessness, as you all are aware. And so our staff are fielding calls, so many calls, Annette will know the details. And part of the reason is the county owns over 200 pieces of land. And we've been working with land use and transportation and clean water and other departments and sheriff and library to deal with this homeless issue, camping in doorways, sidewalks, parking, and all the sanitation issues. So it's been a multi-department effort so far. So we're here today to seek your direction on homeless camping. And also, what policy partnerships and resources. Next slide, please. So we have a homeless camping policy that's dated. It goes back a ways to 96. We also want to create programs to provide alternatives to camping. We want to talk about address disease transmission concerns and also outcomes and effectiveness of our efforts to minimize camping. Next slide, please. So what informs our current policy recommendations? As I mentioned earlier, our current policy is dated, and there's also a new ruling from the U.S. Court of Appeals, Martin versus Boise, and that ruling tells us that homeless may not be criminalized for sitting, lying, or sleeping on sidewalks, streets, or other public property in the absence of a shelter. And we do not have an adult shelter in Washington County, not yet anyway. And then late last year, December 16th, the U.S. Supreme Court denied the city of Boise's appeal to the Martin versus Boise ruling. So that's what brings us here. This is a few months late, but we are here now. And I'll hand it over to my colleague, Annette, to get into the details of homeless encampments and the policy recommendations.
Thank you, Comey. Good afternoon, commissioners and chair. So we had intended to actually provide you this presentation on March 17th, and in lieu, we had the COVID issue arise, and so we spent that time addressing what we would do as a community and as a county to lead through that effort to help our houseless population and our provider agencies to know what we're going to focus on. So as Comey said, we are a little bit late, but we are here to talk about potential recommendations that you might consider. We know that we are seeing, and if we could go to slide 5, the homeless encampments. There we go, thank you. We are seeing an increasing number of campsites. Sometimes we call them hot spots when we see that those campsites are occupied by 10 or more individuals. And it used to be that we had smaller campsites with fewer people, and now we have many more campsites number-wise, as well as the number of people. We have one specific campsite, and you may be hearing about that, and that is over behind Winco by LUT, Land Use and Transportation. And as of May 1st, there were over 40 individuals that were contacted at that site. So this is being compounded by our winter shelters served a high number of individuals and families this winter, with 699 households that stayed at our 8 winter shelters the county operates in partnership with faith-based communities. And most of these individuals did exit without a housing opportunity at the end, just because we have limited access and resources to be able to house everyone. This is resulting in many more comments received and an increased cost to businesses and government agencies in cleaning up after the campsites as people move on, and also creates a public health and environmental impact to our community. Next slide, please. So some of our recommendations for consideration would be to update our policy regarding homeless campsites. That was a resolution passed in 1996, and that would consider amending the resolution to comply with Martin versus Boise ruling to regulate homeless camping on public properties with reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions consistent with a decision. Thousand Oaks, California, their government implemented that. And what it means is that it allows a person on public property to sleep, let's say, if you designate between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., but then during the daytime, they need to remove their belongings and go to either day centers or other resources in the community. Also authorizing homeless and campsites by adopting local codes. And so the draft LUT long-range planning work plan includes a potential Tier 2 task to consider community development code amendments for homeless shelters and or camping. The board could take action to move this task to Tier 1 at the time of the LUT work plan adoption. That would just provide another tool or mechanism. In the 2020 legislative session, House Bill 4001 would have allowed shelters to be placed on land use through that provision, but it did not pass. And it may come back at a future legislative session. Next slide, please. As Comey mentioned, the gap in shelter has been elevated during the COVID response, as we do not have any shelter beds for adult-only households. And so that really created difficulties when the winter shelters were closing down and trying to comply with Governor Brown's Executive Order 2012 to stay home and save lives. So we encouraged through our outreach through the EOC, when we engaged with 309 campers the last week of March, if they were well and they could shelter in place, to do that, because we did not have capacity to bring those individuals into some other congregate setting. Following that, the Oregon Housing and Community Services did provide funding to Community Action, $250,000, which did open 90 congregate beds that operated April and will end May 31st, the end of this month, and will not continue on after that. The other initiative we're looking at here and continue is to partner with Clackamas and Multnomah County to look at a regional shelter plan. What capacity do we have as a region to shelter adult-only households to address that? And should the state, they had planned to release a capital grant for $3.5 million and potentially more, as they were talking during the legislative session. Currently, they have not released that capital grant, NOFA, Notice of Funding Available, so we have not competed for that. We had hoped to have $400,000 to be able to leverage a competitive application, and that would operate an adult shelter for a year. So right now, we don't know where the state is with regards to the NOFA, but we want to stay poised and try to respond to that. Next slide, please. Another initiative would be to create safe parking program for people living in vehicles to camp at designated sites. The City of Beaverton implemented in 2019 a safe parking program and currently have 9 vehicles parking at 3 different sites under the ORS statute. They have a lengthy wait list. They have a faith-based community member who is in an unincorporated area, but within the city, that would like to be able to camp and provide vehicle camping. The LUT long-range planning work plan includes a Tier 1 task to develop potential CDC amendments in response to the City of Beaverton's request to allow vehicle camping in urban unincorporated areas. And Comey and myself have met with several of the LUT staff to launch that discussion and to continue that work so that we can expand this program. Next slide, please. We know an effective strategy to helping persons end homelessness and sustain their housing is to help them increase their income through employment, but many people with disabilities really rely on Social Security disability benefits. And Multnomah County launched an ASSIST program many years ago, which has been very successful in helping individuals apply for and obtain their Social Security disability benefits the first time through without multiple applications. And it speaks highly to the experienced staff and to the executive director, who was a trainer on how to do this type of work and now has this nonprofit. We want to really leverage and bring at least a full-time position to Washington County to work with our disabled populations, and especially those within the homeless system, to be able to create that mechanism for income supports that will support them going forward to be more self-sufficient. But it has a win-win not only for them, but for our homeless system overall, because as they have income, they will pay 30% of their income towards any housing that we subsidize, and that helps us then to serve additional people. Next slide. The catalyst of Built for Zero, I've presented on this last fall. And so this is the program in October that Kaiser Permanente funded. A team from Washington County, included public health, housing, and some of our nonprofit providers and faith community, to learn about systems level design to know all homeless in our community by their name and to prioritize the most vulnerable for permanent supportive housing using case conferencing approach. I implemented this the first part of March, and in 3 months, we have rehoused 24 chronic homeless adults with more than 60 years of homelessness amongst them. This has been a truly, truly catalyst approach for us, because we have brought together law enforcement from cities, the county. The ASSIST program is currently participating as well and has offered to help any of these individuals. We want to refer to them to access income, and then we're prioritizing our rent subsidies to support those individuals who are the highest need and least likely to engage in ending their homeless situation. Next slide, please. So our COVID-19 response continues to expand in various areas, but we know that we need to do something immediately, given that our 90-bed congregate shelters are closing down, given that we have continued increasing numbers of homeless campers and campsites, and that we still have major concerns about the transmission of disease amongst this vulnerable population who does not have access to sanitary washing and other healthy supports. And so we are exploring creating a designated tent campsite community, or a tent village, that would provide up to 50 campers in a designated location. And we're in partnership with the City of Hillsborough, so that was the meeting I was hosting just prior to coming over to this meeting. I've met with the City of Portland Mayor's Office. They were instrumental in launching 4 tent villages in response to COVID in the City of Portland for 100 tents. And so I've learned a great deal from them on the opportunities that exist and also some of the challenges of implementing such a program here. We would implement it to help reduce the pressure of the individuals in Dairy Creek that are in the unincorporated as well as on the city land, and to help provide them with opportunities of mental health, addiction treatment, as well as basic needs and supports to access housing.
Could I ask, in your meetings with folks from the City of Portland, with the program that they've had, do they see that it has been successful in satisfying an unmet need? Or what is the response that you get?
So it is a temporary solution to address really the public health aspect. They have been engaging with the individuals, but that they were the ones who said you really need to have those social service treatment pieces that provide people that pathway forward also. I asked how long they're going to extend their tent villages. They had written into their contract with their service provider that it would sunset 21 days after the emergency declaration would end. But they also understand that they can't just discharge and dismantle the campsite. So they need to be working to help people find permanent solutions. And that is the same with when they expanded their congregate shelters into the Coliseum and other locations. So it's an ongoing work piece that Zach said that they are focusing on. And so for us, as we talk today, this might be a temporary solution to get us through till winter shelter season opens, and then they would transition into that. But our hope would be that we would vacate those campsites and that they would not be reoccupied again.
Thank you.
The other, yeah, yeah. The other would be to explore increasing the number of hotel vouchers for our special populations, our, high-risk older adults with underlying health conditions and families with children. We know that as the 90-day 90-bed shelters closed down, that there are some of these populations that are not going to do well living on our streets. They just have no resources to be able to do that. And so trying to figure out how do we do that with hotels. And then not on this slide this weekend, I began to explore opening in partnership with 3 of our Family Promise. You all did a declaration or proclamation actually last November, and they were here. Family Promise is an interfaith hospitality network model for sheltering, and their focus has been families, but in working with Family Promise of Tualatin Valley and the mayors in South County who are very much interested in a shelter, we are looking at actually funding a shelter in South County, Beaverton, and Hillsborough. We have 3 Family Promises, and so if each of them would open and each take, a proportion of families and a proportion of adult-only households, and then we could house them in hotels, that would provide the shelter aspect that currently the interfaith or the faith-based partners that allow them to sleep in their churches cannot do at this time as their churches are closed and people are concerned about contact. So that would create us 30 units or 30 households that could be served over the next 5 months. And during that time, we would align and link these families with the CARES Act funds that are coming through for rent assistance and rehousing programs funded through the e-board funds from the state that are going to community action, CSBG, and maybe some CDBG and other funds, ESG, that are going to community action. So our focus would really be to stabilize these individuals, have case management provided by the Family Promise agencies, and then be able to transition them into housing. So I think, and the outcomes there would just really, through all of this, is let's figure out how do we get people into housing, and that's how we're going to diminish the number of people in our campsites and living on our streets. But it's really going to take alignment of policy and resources to do this. Questions?
Wow, so there was a lot there.
There was. I was going to ask, how would you summarize your recommendations to us?
Well, I believe that we really do need to begin with our camping policy. It is creating conflicts or questionable, like, how do we operate under Martin versus Boise? Because our policy says one thing, but yet we know that we can't do that necessarily, and we really need a policy that directs all of our entities on how do we manage that.
I haven't looked at our policies recently, but I assume our policies are in violation of the court case.
I have copies of it if you'd like to see it. It does not meet the current. And Paul Hathaway has reviewed it extensively, County Council, and has made some recommendations.
So if I might pick up on that, and Steve, Mr. Rhodes, and Mr. Rapplier, if you could help me through this. When we on the board had the opportunity of approving the work plan earlier this year, the long-range work plan item was a tier 2. So what I hear is we are responsible for, and maybe that's too harsh of a word, but there's this disconnect now between our need to address this and how we've set ourselves up for the rest of the year. And it sounds like the clock is ticking on our addressing this court case, the outcome of this court challenge. So I don't feel comfortable in just saying, well, take the same exact resources you have today and go solve this. That is not formula for success either. So are we in a position where we need to once again turn to you and say, can you help us figure out a set of options or a path through this?
I think I'd rely on county council's advice first.
Okay.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I think everybody in the Ninth Circuit struggling how to deal with Boise. There are some conflicting interpretations of that, but I think, we have a basic understanding of it, and we are complying with it. I mean, right now, we do have some places for people to go, and when they don't have a place to go, we are cognizant of that fact. So it's a matter of enforcement for our sheriff's office and the local police, but that's what we're trying to work with our partners here to get some solutions, and it is going to cost some money.
Well, so I guess if nothing else, it sounds to me like I'm probably going to want to see updating our homeless camping policies for the work plan for next year.
That's what I thought you were asking initially, was how do we get it from Tier 2 to Tier 1 in the LUT work plan?
Yep.
Is that
Sounds like we're going to have to do it next year
when you say
for the
next year?
2021 work plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll make sure that we get
Okay.
that included or clearly into the plan.
So that's one of the recommendations. There's a whole slew of them, and they all make sense to move forward with. I mean, thank you for reminding us that House Bill 4001 was a glimmer of hope, and then the session ended abruptly in March. Seems like forever ago now. And who knows if, well, I can't imagine through the emergency disaster, see now I've forgotten the special legislative phrase, emergency disaster legislative session. I can't see them addressing that there, so now we're looking at the long session in the spring and maybe something in the interim setup for that. So we'll need to make sure that is on our legislative agenda for us to discuss and follow up on. I like the fact that should that NOFA come about, that you're poised to act.
The state one, yes,
Yep.
we are.
It sounds like you're already pursuing the safe parking program, because that's on the Tier 1 for this 2020 work plan. So on the other recommendations, hopefully I'm not skipping any. I assume that with the ASSIST program and the cost that you've got in that, I assume that's in the proposed budget?
It was, but it is not now.
Okay.
And for clarity, the shelter funds, the 400,000 was in, but currently the budget line item is 40,000.
So did I just say the wrong thing, or you have enough to go after it, but if we win it, we'd have to commit more?
Correct. We couldn't run a shelter on 40,000 unless we find other funds, yeah.
Okay, but we don't have to spend it until we qualify?
We
Right.
we are successful,
Correct.
yeah, with the state.
Okay, okay. And so you have that 40K in order
It's a
to,
placeholder, right.
got it. Did I miss any other recommendations you need any feedback on? Or need to make sure we
Could I
have
ask a
synced up
question,
on? Yes,
please?
absolutely.
The safe parking program, I just want some clarity around this. It's operating in Beaverton, correct? And did you say there are 6 spots?
Currently, we're operating 9, and they have a wait list. And the ORS statutes limit 3 vehicles per site.
Okay, and are those, I don't know if you can tell me the exact locations, but is it in a parking lot area?
It's in the parking lot of our churches. There are 3 churches.
Okay, and then the reason I'm asking the question is that the Safeway parking lot on Shoals Ferry and Beaverton Hillsdale Highway has a number of campers there as well. And how are those, obviously they're not parking there legally, but what is the process for patrolling that? Are they safe there? I mean, just asking the questions.
Sure. So I get calls on various vehicles parked on, such as Lowe's, over by Bonnie Hayes Animal Shelter. There are campers there, although they have been asked now to move, is what I've been told.
That's an operating.
So it's the property owner that is responsible for the campers on their property. But we do send outreach workers out to them to engage to see if there's a way we can work with them to get into housing.
And the question, the location I'm asking about is a retail front that is no longer operational, that is closed. So I'm just.
Somebody still owns it and
Yeah.
is responsible for their property.
And I'm really thinking more about the safety of the people that are there.
Yep.
I have one question, and that is, and you can take this offline with me because I doubt that everybody else is interested, but I keep hearing over and over and over, what makes us so attractive versus a lot of other states who are not facing quite the same dilemma? And so I would like to know what the systemic issue really is. Why us? So you don't have to answer it now. I mean,
Well, I would just say, and then I'll let Comey add additional, that there was a study done, and I can find this study for you, but it's kind of a West Coast a dilemma. I mean, Washington State, Oregon, and California all experienced, affordable housing crisis and higher numbers of homeless. And so I can look up and get you that study.
appreciate it, because obviously the next jump is always, are we somehow with various programs attracting people? And I say no, but that's the thing you hear over and over and over and over again. So
Yeah, I think, and this is just speculation, but the weather is relatively mild, and housing costs have gone up in the last decade 35% or higher, and wages have gone up maybe 8-9% before COVID. So, I mean, I was talking to a colleague in Ohio last week, and their per unit cost for housing is about half of ours. We average, our assistants, we average $865, Washington County, per person we assist. And that's the highest in the state. And there are areas where you could get a one-bedroom apartment for $500. We can find one for $900 here.
Yeah, I will follow up with you.
Thank you to both of you for everything that you and your colleagues in the various departments do each and every day. You're having an impact not only on the people that you help, but also a positive impact for our community overall. And I'm grateful. Thank you
very much.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you.
Yes. And now for something completely different, we're going to head on over into the sanitary sewer domain. Woohoo! With a briefing on the Moss Street Sanitary Sewer Local Improvement District. And I thank our Clean Water Services crew members for hanging in there with us for our long day.
Yeah, we got a call to Nora and Andy Braun that we're about an hour ahead of schedule, so this is great. So Andy should be on the line, and he's ready to do a update on some folks that are in the LID and what they would like as an ask.
Welcome, Andy. This is what, the second or third time we've seen you via Zoom over the last few meetings.
It is. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today via this media and this outlet. So thank you. So Chair Harrington and members of the board, next Tuesday, we have a public hearing scheduled to levy final assessments for the Moss Street Sanitary Sewer Local Improvement District. We actually opened this hearing on March the 31st, but due to COVID, we ask that you continue the public hearing to May the 26th, next Tuesday. We notified the owners about this continuation and did receive one comment for consideration. That owner asked for an extension of time to take advantage of the early connection incentive. The owner has indicated that he may testify at the public hearing next week, perhaps by Zoom, perhaps in person. Just to give a little bit of context to this, if you recall our LID ordinance, it has a provision in it for an early connection incentive where we would waive the engineering and administrative cost of the assessments if the owners connect to the sewer within 1 year. So that time period runs out January the 6th, 2021. Due to, so the owner's request was really due to economic hardship. It is not a case that construction has been disallowed during this time period, but due to economic hardship, the owner would like to extend that time period and connect sometime, maybe up to 6 months after that January 6th, 2021 date. So what we wanted to do today was provide you with some options if the owner testifies and before you adopt the legislation. We've reviewed the ordinance and unfortunately we looked for opportunities within the context of the ordinance to provide some relief. Ordinance 35 is pretty tight and doesn't allow a whole lot of flexibility with time extensions. So while that didn't really provide an opportunity without actually going back and amending Ordinance 35, we did look for other possible opportunities. About the only thing that we could find in there was the ability to adjust the interest rate to provide some economic relief. When we first adopted or formed this LID, the interest rate was 2.56%. That was the Oregon Bond Index rate. And currently that is the rate at which the financing would apply on this project. Of course, we add the 2% administrative cost onto that, so really 4.56%. In looking at the ordinance with the legal department, we did feel that there was some flexibility should the board want to try to provide some economic relief to perhaps adjust that interest rate to the now or the current interest rate, which is about 1.39%. Outside of that, there weren't a whole lot of options within the ordinance. So really we're asking two things today. One is to give you that update so that you can consider it, and when and if the owner testifies, we did tell him that we would bring this issue to your attention regardless of whether he testifies next week. But want to give you an opportunity to think about that and see if you want to make adjustments. That the ordinance does allow for you to make adjustments in setting the final assessments. So that's one opportunity. The other part that we wanted to mention is that if you recall back in October of last year, we at a work session, we discussed with you bringing our local improvement district and or the reimbursement district ordinance back to you to make some adjustments to it. One of the opportunities, one of the things that we're looking to do is to bring those two ordinances a little bit more in line with each other. And with the reimbursement district ordinance, we're looking at adding some language which gives a little bit more flexibility. Oh, shoot. All right. Are you having a tough time hearing me?
I did for couple of sentences there, but I got you back.
Okay. I'll go back and repeat the last couple of things I said. Okay, my apologies about that. So in addition to being able to respond to the resident about the options with setting the assessments for the Moss Street LID, looking back to October of last year, we, at a work session, we discussed modifying the reimbursement district ordinance and the local improvement district ordinance. When we still intend to bring that back to you perhaps next month, and within the reimbursement district ordinance, looking at providing a little bit more flexibility to respond to unusual circumstances. This is the same type of information that we could bring back with a revision in the local improvement district ordinance, so that you would have the flexibility within the ordinance to respond to a request such as this. So those are the two things that we wanted to present to you today, and happy to answer any questions or entertain any discussion about economic relief on the Moss Street project, and or take any direction for returning with the LID ordinance.
Commissioners, do you have any questions on all that has been shared with us today?
I guess, do you have a preference?
How about I answer that?
Okay.
Okay. So I believe the interest rate should be adjusted because it is the current rate. So it's the bond rate plus 2%. I think that's an easy piece to do. The question is whether or not we want to extend the early incentive. I would recommend against that down the road. The reason for the economic incentive was so that people would connect to the sewer. Because basically we're making this investment, and the intention through the LID is for people to connect within a certain time frame. So the purpose of the year was to have people make those decisions and to provide adequate financing through the utility to provide that to them. But certainly folks, because the longer you increase the incentive, at a certain point it's no longer an incentive. So it's for this board to decide, but I do know the previous boards have decided that the 1 year is an adequate incentive to provide people the time to connect.
Related to that, look, and you may not know the answer to this question because so we're in this terrible recession, and I've heard many financial experts, and I'm not one of those, talk about how this is, at least the number of people impacted is greater than with the Great Recession. Certainly different factors, but I'm wondering if you looked back in time during the Great Recession, did you deal with any local improvement districts and sewer line connections to have a feel for how many people were interested but found themselves in economic hardship like this?
Sandy, do you recall any LIDs back in the 08, 09 timeframe?
Interesting, what we experienced during that time was a dramatic drop-off in the number of LID requests that we received. Up to that point, we were executing 2 to 3 LID projects per year at owner's requests. We actually went through a 4 to 5 year period where we actually had no LID requests and actually did not do any LID projects during that time.
Diane, what you're proposing is a reduction, and I don't know, maybe you have to have your counsel chat about this a bit, but how do you refinance one and not refinance everybody? I mean, it's a precedent. If I were in that situation, I would ask for refinance as well, meaning everybody in this LID plus any other LID. are we sure that this isn't something that now we've changed our rules to say we'll negotiate?
We wouldn't want to change it just for this person. You would want to create the interest rate for this whole LID.
You said that, but how about any other LIDs that have been formed with an interest rate?
So at the time, we should be taking whatever the current bond rate is and adding the 2% administrative fee procedurally.
Which we did to this one, too.
Right. So when we do the proposal, right, it's at the time. So now we're doing final assessment. And normally between the time you begin the LID and the time you do the final assessment, we don't see such a decline in underlying interest rate. So I think it would be appropriate in this case to set the final assessment rate at the current bond rate.
There's no precedent in your mind
No.
that we now have to honor it for any other LID that comes in and says, I did it 3 years ago, and I know you assessed me, but now we have different conditions.
Because we're not doing anything unique. We're setting it at the, whatever the bond rate is.
I'm happy.
Any other questions? So we have a recommendation from staff and further clarification to move forward with the. Thank you. I appreciate that. So we have a recommendation from staff with further clarification on modifying the interest rate for this particular LID. Does that seem reasonable?
Fair enough.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I think the recommendation is not one, but two.
Yes, it's on that page, yes.
On page, on the
Yeah.
last page of our documents for today, and I support that.
Okay. Did you get everything, all the closure you were looking for?
Okay,
All right.
thank you very much.
Thank you for hanging in there with us and joining us at this time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Good to see you.
All right, thanks.
Beard's getting longer.
It is.
Any other comments from the commissioners? I just have one. I wish our colleagues the best this evening in receiving the results from the election, as well as to all of us for the 2 levies that we have put on the ballot, and we'll also see what happens with the regional homeless services finance measure as well. So.
And before we close, I was just checking the board agenda for next week, and there's an error on the website. It says Monday, May 26th, instead of Tuesday. Just,
We will take care of that.
thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
Picky Pam.
That's it for today. We're adjourned.